Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm using my original bump music from July of 2000 by Canned Heat. I used that for a few years. And I'm doing so because Michael Lang, who organized the 1969 Woodstock Festival, died at the age of 71 yesterday in New York. He teamed up with Joel Rosenman and Artie Cornfield. In 1968, they spent a year. 1969, they pulled off Woodstock. Lang recalled that he had signed Jefferson Airplane, this band, Canned Heat, and CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and from there it took off and became, not many people name a generation, right? So Michael Lang, dead at the age of 71 in a rare form of cancer. He will be missed, and we will retire again the Canned Heat. Just a little tip of the hat to a man who changed a lot of lives because Woodstock unleashed a generation of music and of concerts and of festivals. It was a pretty amazing event. Now to the grim news. 19 people died in New York City, deadliest fire in decades. Yesterday, it was the worst fire in New York City since the 1990 nightclub fire that I wasn't even on the air for. I remember that fire, but it's been so the entire time that I've been on the air, locally in Los Angeles or nationally with Salem since 2000. There's never been a fire this deadly. 19 people dead, including 9 children. An additional 44 people are injured. 13 of them are in critical condition. 9 children, as I mentioned. The occupants of the third floor apartment where the fire started fled and did not leave, did not shut the door. So the smoke poured into hallways and up the stairwells. It's a Gambian community, largely African community. Classic New York story, classic New York building, everything from studio apartments to 4-bedroom apartments. People jammed in there, folks coming out of the doors. New York's firefighters did an amazing job. But the Happy Land nightclub in 1990 was a preventable tragedy. That was an intentionally set arson. This is a space heater. The classic origin of most residential fires in America is a space heater. And that's what happened here. Hearts are broken. Prayers go out to all who are grieving there. The day before, 20 people died in Pakistan, 22 people, including 10 children, after being stuck in a sudden snowstorm in their vehicles overnight, and the temperatures plummeted. So we have a tragedy in New York of fire, and we have a tragedy of ice in Pakistan within 24 hours. 9 children in the former, 10 in the latter. You realize you don't really have any problems. You really don't have any problems when that happens. I was watching the Browns beat the Bengals yesterday and thinking to myself as that happened that most Americans complain about things that they really do not have any problems when they compared to real tragedy. God bless those people. Speaking of the playoffs, the wildest NFL week at the end, Big Ben is not done. As Tommy Viter said yesterday on the air, they're not ready for the glue factory yet. I'm not dead. From Monty Python, Ben Roethlisberger comes back, beats the Ravens, goes in. So it's Raiders at the Bengals, Eagles at the Bucks, Steelers play the Chiefs. That's going to be ugly. Patriots play the Bills. That's going to be an interesting game. 49ers play the Cowboys. Cardinals at the Rams. Rams lost to the 49ers. Amazing game yesterday. So it all remains to be seen after that. But our hats are off to all those who got there. The Browns will be there next year. Biggest story economically, supply chain issues. Leave new homes without garage doors and gutters. I like this story simply because these are first world problems compared to the terrible tragedy that I just talked about. everywhere I go, including myself, we all have complaints about projects that are taking 3 times as long and cost twice as much as we expected, and that's because the pandemic. But they're not real problems. They're inconveniences. In fact, American finances, according to the Wall Street Journal this morning, got stronger during the pandemic. Yeah, they did. COVID has approached its peak in all parts of England, which is good news for us, meaning we're probably 3 weeks behind them. So 3 weeks from now, the numbers should begin to go down. Prime Minister Bennett of Israel appealed for patience amid public dismay over shifting, unclear COVID rules. So it's not just us. Even though Israel does the best job, they have the same problem that our people do, which is talking too much and knowing too little. There's just not that much you can say other than get vaccinated, get a booster. If you're feeling unwell, stay home. Don't go out and spread it. They got 200 serious cases in Israel, which is really quite higher than they normally have for months. Good news for Republicans over the weekend. Both Senator John Thune, the second-ranking Republican in the Senate of South Dakota, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, both declared they would run in 2022. No more retirements. That made Rick Scott, who is leading the National Republican Senatorial Committee effort, very happy. Incumbents are easier to raise money for. Incumbents win, typically. Ron Johnson's a significant, hard-nosed retail politician. He'll win. John Thune will win easily. Ron Johnson has a piece in the Wall Street Journal explaining why he's seeking a third term when he promised only to run for 2 originally. And I think Wisconsin voters will accept that. Interesting bit that the left should note, buried under all the other articles in the Washington Post. Joe Manchin had offered to spend $1.8 trillion in December. He had been working on a plan with the White House, and then he got hammered when he said no to BBB, which wasn't 1.8, it was 5 trillion. Any normal person, they just wouldn't budge. They lied to him. And they berated him when he said no to BBB. He pulled that off the table. No, screw you. No, you don't get to beat me up in public and come back. That'll teach the kiddie corps over at the White House something. Paranoia is a rational response to a world gone mad. Joseph Epstein writes that in the Wall Street Journal this morning. It's a great essay. Go and read it. Abroad, Russia's Putin seizes on crises to assert control over the former Soviet republics. I think we all knew that. There are Russian troops in Kazakhstan this morning. NATO says, according to Jan Stoltenberg, the steely-eyed Secretary General of NATO, he's the guy from Europe we like, that they stand ready for conflict in Europe. Hardcore message to the Russians, the opposite of Joe Biden saying, I'm negotiating. We've sent Wendy Sherman. Now, many of you probably do not know who Wendy Sherman is. She, quote, negotiated the 1994 nuclear deal with North Korea that gave them a pathway to nuclear weapons. She, quote, negotiated the Iran deal under President Obama. I'm afraid she's our lead negotiator with Russia. I think Poland had better be ready for a partition and the Baltics for being reabsorbed into the Soviet Union. You send Wendy Sherman somewhere, hang on to your wallet. Russia is negotiating in public, according to the Times of Israel, ruling out concessions ahead of the security talks. Iran, by the way, sanctioned 52 Americans. They've threatened 52 Americans. One of them, Brian Hook, has been threatened with death, and a Princeton professor who worked for that murderous jihadi regime of the mullahs, he was chuckling about that on air. Princeton should have him fired today. The one thing that remains bipartisan, and I compliment Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who, I'm sure President Biden agreed, put out a note to the Iranians yesterday. They screw with any of our people. This is all about killing Soleimani, who was in Iraq to kill Americans. Soleimani was a war criminal. He killed thousands of Americans over a dozen years. Killing Soleimani was a right and just act. If they retaliated against any American, hell will rain down on them, and they know it. They know that. And so good for Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, to make that known. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. It's Monday. Get out of bed and get going, America. Warm it up. Get the car going. Like my voice, it has to warm up on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. China has built the largest DNA database in the world, and it's only growing. This should concern all of us. That's because China could use this information in the future, perhaps, for example, to build bioweapons targeting specific ethnic groups. Given this background, common sense dictates that Americans shouldn't be storing their DNA or other personal information with Chinese-linked firms. Quite sensibly, after getting an FBI briefing about the firm's connections to China, the Los Angeles County Sheriff notified the county that his office wouldn't work with Fulgent. That's the genetics firm LA County hired for mandatory COVID testing and registration. Fulgent even admits in a public disclaimer it stores information outside the United States, where data privacy protections may not be as secure. I'll bet. What's alarming is how many others have chosen to work with Fulgent. The question is why.
Publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Absurdity of yesterday, nothing does. If that doesn't, if that's not, that's in poker, I think it's called the tell, right? That's the reveal. Yeah, this is sort of a joke. We're kind of playing a game here. We don't really mean it. We want to stop Trump from running again in 2024. We know the only person who was killed as a result of the actions of anybody on January 6th was Ashley Babbitt. And you know what? Let's have Broadway singers perform for us. I mean, you cannot write a Hollywood script that would be any more laughable than this.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Catalysts create change. When you have moments that all of a sudden you remember where you were, typically those moments mean something big is coming after that. So there's only a couple moments like that that define a generation. For my parents' generation, it's where were you when Kennedy was shot? My parents could tell you. 9/11, I remember exactly where I was. I was in second grade classroom at Quest Academy in Palatine, Illinois. I remember where I was when the 2008 financial crisis was unfolding. Gulf of Tonkin was an event, highly suspicious, I want to say, was an event that led to the official declaration of the United States getting involved in the Vietnam War. World War I, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, who was the presumptive heir to the throne of the Austrian-Hungary Empire. He died in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and everything else unfolded from there. One of the messiest catastrophic wars in human history. So you look through these dates, and then you see what comes next. When you have those moments, it creates a mandate for rulers to dramatically change things. And January 6th was no different. Now, I am by no means saying that what happened on January 6th is anywhere in the orbit of the catastrophe of World War I, World War II. However, that is what Kamala Harris and Biden are saying.
Keep up with what's trending.
Streaming on Salem.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Michael Lang, who organized Woodstock, died. So I thought we'd play Woodstock bumps this week. Glad that you could be with us. On Friday, of course, audio was released of the Supreme Court case in which the vaccine mandates were before the court. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor just said an absurd couple of, just crazy talk. It was like Cliff Clavin on the Cheers show. She was like the mailman spouting at the bar. Cut number 7.
Counsel, those numbers show that Omicron is as deadly and causes as much serious disease in the unvaccinated as Delta did. The numbers, look at the hospitalization rates that are going on. We have more affected people in the country today than we had a year ago in January. We have hospitals that are almost at full capacity with people severely ill on ventilators. We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators. So saying it's a different variant just underscores the fact that without some workplace rules with respect to vaccines or encouraging vaccines, because this is not a vaccine mandate, and requiring masking and requiring isolation of people who have tested for COVID. Because none of you have addressed that part of the ETS is to say something that should be self-evident to the world, but is not.
Now you know what it's like to work with a Cliff Clavin. I don't know what it's like. My friends on the court have never said a word about Justice Sotomayor, but that was a real reveal. She doesn't have a clue. I had dinner last night with an old friend who shall remain nameless, who had gotten, that does great damage to people, who'd gotten the vaccine but not the booster. And he said, Omicron doesn't kill anyone. And are you out of your mind? Omicron kills the unvaccinated. It's not as bad. It doesn't make you as sick if you're a healthy person as Delta did. But if you have two groups of 100 people, all those 100 people are going to walk away, and 6 of those people in the second group of 100 are going to die if those are the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated. So that's the deal. It's a very deadly disease. It's not as deadly as Delta. I can't believe someone like that. Then Rochelle Walensky goes on Fox News Sunday with Brett Baier. And by the way, everyone should start recording Fox News Sunday with Brett Baier. They are going to win the ratings war. There is finally a Sunday show for everyone. There is finally a Sunday show that is fair and tough-minded. Brett does a good job. Rochelle Walensky of the CDC sits down with Brett on Sunday. Cut number 10.
In the questioning, Justice Sonia Sotomayor made this statement.
We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators.
Now, we can find from Friday suggests there are fewer than 3,500 current pediatric hospitalizations from COVID-19. Is that true?
Yeah, but, here's what I can tell you about our pediatric hospitalizations now. First of all, the vast majority of children who are in the hospital are unvaccinated. And for those children who are not eligible for vaccination, we do know that they are most likely to get sick with COVID if their family members aren't vaccinated. So the most important thing we can do for those children to keep them out of the hospital is to vaccinate them and to vaccinate their family members around them.
Understood. But the number is not 100,000. It's roughly 3,500. In hospitals now.
Yes, there are, and in fact, what I will say is, while pediatric hospitalizations are rising, they're still about 15-fold less than hospitalizations of our older age demographics.
You see, what she won't do, what Brett was trying to get her to do, because it would have been helpful to the country, Justice Sotomayor was wrong. There really is very small threat. There's some parents have to grieve. Some parents will lose children, just as we have automobile accidents, just as we have various things. But there is a very tiny, tiny threat to children. Tiny threat to children. And Justice Sotomayor, using scare tactics from the bench, that was a low moment for the court. Really a low moment for the court. That's just terrible, terrible, terrible misinformation from a justice of the Supreme Court. More when we come back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Streaming on Salem Now.
You called your son, and you personally promised him you would be here.
Lucas, I don't know how to help you!
Your daddy loves you, you gotta know it, pal!
Do you feel the love?
Prayer is a powerful thing, Ethan. It really does work, if you believe.
What reason does he have to care about some guy who's supposed to be his dad, but he's never around? I can't do it. I can't. I'm not ready for this, man.
I'm done with you.
We all deserve a second chance. Right, Ethan?
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. Sometimes there are policies so destructive that at first you don't believe they're true. Joe Biden is currently defending one, his plan to award $450,000 to migrants separated from their families after entering the U.S. illegally. Children of deceased U.S. soldiers are separated from their parents permanently. They don't receive this kind of money. And migrants who enter the U.S. legally certainly don't get this kind of payout. The really big jackpot, it seems, is being reserved for the lawbreakers. There are some obvious truths here. First, behavior that's subsidized gets repeated. Joe Biden is effectively inviting many more illegal immigrants to breach America's open borders. Second, he's betting over time the payoffs will benefit his party in political terms. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Americans watch in shock and dismay as our president, the country's chief law enforcement officer, brazenly rewards lawbreaking, a clear violation of his oath to defend our nation's laws. It's a sorry sight indeed.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Our despicable president, I've never used the term with regard to a president in my long career. Joe Biden's a despicable human being. And he's not only the worst president, he's the worst man to serve as president. He's a bad human being, in my opinion. And dagger at democracy, dagger at the throat of democracy. I wonder who wrote that for him. What left-wing hack. This is exactly what the left has always done, just as the fascists on the right have done. And the Nazis did, and that is you accuse your enemies of what you're doing. It's a smokescreen. It's not projection. That it is as well, but it's not primarily projection. It's a smokescreen. I can ruin this country while charging my enemies with ruining the country. That is what you do. Who is suppressing free speech, the most important freedom of all? The left or the right, Joe Biden? Who has created a hatred of tens of millions of Americans like you have toward the unvaccinated? Is there a precedent for the way you have described vast numbers of Americans who in good conscience have not had have not been vaccinated? It's not even a vaccine, by the way. You know that the dictionaries have changed the definition. CDC changed it. I read it for you earlier this week. It is no, for all of vaccination history, it prevented you getting the illness. Now I think it's changed to protect.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
This is a story of how 1 million children were placed with local foster families through an unlikely alliance between the Chinese government and a British footballer. Parents from all walks of life share their stories of overcoming the one-child policy by taking in orphans. With unprecedented access across the country, this is a unique insight into the lives of the 90s orphans now driving the 21st century's fastest growing economy.
This story needs to be told across the world. At a time where there's so much negativity and cynicism, here's proof that a single leap of faith can change the world.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. Joe Hill, now in the Teachers Unions of America, which may be the least like public institution left in the country. It may be the rock bottom as they continue to oblige Chicago school children, all 300,000+ of them, to stay home. And in various districts across the United States are striking. They say it's a health issue. It's a lockout by teachers of students. You can't go lower in credibility than the teachers' union. Jim Jordan, congressman from Ohio, telling the Rump committee that Nancy Pelosi has allegedly investigating January 6th to go pound sand. He's right. Constitutionally, they cannot summon him. If they'd asked him and it had been a legitimately organized committee, he might have gone along. You know, Nancy Pelosi is going to wake up, or the Democrats are going to wake up someday and realize that their only hope to have actually made January 6th a deal, an interesting committee, would have been to have allowed Kevin McCarthy to staff it, Jim Banks to chair it, put any people on it you want, equal subpoena power, just like Iran-Contra, just like any serious committee. It's not a serious committee. It's just that they make referrals, but it's a joke committee. It's a rump committee. It's a kangaroo court. People aren't taking it seriously for good reason. I want to go back to Fox News Sunday with Bret Baier, again hoping that Bret becomes the voice of Fox News Sunday, because he had two great interviews yesterday with Rochelle Walensky and James Clyburn. It's what we have been waiting for, we being independents, center left, center right, normal people. The people who go to church and who might put something on their TiVo. They've been waiting for a show that's just the news on Sunday and has some newsmaker interviews, left, right, and center. Bret delivered that yesterday. Here is Rochelle Walensky, head of CDC, talking with Bret Baier about Omicron, cut number 13.
But, you know, the questioning in the Supreme Court also said that Omicron was as deadly as Delta. That is not true, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Omicron is not as deadly as Delta, at least by your data right now, right?
We are starting to see data from other countries that indicate on a person-by-person basis it may not be. However, given the volume of cases that we're seeing with Omicron, we very well may see death rates rise dramatically.
Yeah, she really isn't capable of answering a question. She's as bad as all of them. Fauci and HHS secretary, they're just terrible. Dr. Fauci's been bad for a long time. The answer is, that's correct, Bret. But I want to warn you, there are more Omicron cases than Delta, so death rates will still be significant. Just straightforward, answer the question. It gets worse. Here she won't directly answer the value of natural immunity, cut number 14.
Okay, back to the mandates for a second. People are losing their jobs. More than 220 Marines, sailors, airmen have been kicked out of the military for refusing to get vaccinated. Healthy service members, some of them have circulating antibodies in their blood from past infections, but they're not the antibodies the government recognizes. Is that fair?
I think the thing that's most disruptive to any business or industry is to have half their workforce out because they're sick with COVID. We have seen with the Omicron variant that
Did you catch
prior
that?
protection protects you.
She didn't answer the question. She just doesn't answer the question. One more time. Bret Baier, focused question. I'm going to let this one roll on. What about your promise to restore public trust in the CDC? Bret, zeroing in over the target, cut 15.
Dr. Walensky, you mentioned the confusion about the guidance and over the past year. The most recent example, obviously, is on isolation and testing, but other guidance is the mask wearing, educators being vaccinated before returning to the classroom. Before you took this job officially, you emphasized that one of your primary goals was to restore public trust. But in this time, do you think that it's fair to say that the trust and confidence of the public has gone down with the CDC?
Thank you, Bret. This is hard. We have ever-evolving science with an ever-evolving variant, and my job is to provide updated guidance in the context of rapidly rising cases. And that is what we've done, and I'm here to explain it to the American people, and I'm committed to continuing to do so and to continuing to improve.
And we appreciate you coming on. We really do. Just getting facts out there. I do want to read this quote from this piece looking at how universities are handling handling this. At Georgetown University, fully vaccinated students are randomly tested for COVID every week using a PCR test, which can detect tiny amounts of dead virus. Asymptomatic students who test positive are ordered to a room in a designated building where they spend 10 days in confinement. Food is dropped off once a day at the door. Now, Georgetown is still using a 10-day quarantine. What do you say to the major companies and universities who are ignoring your new guidance and sticking to the 10 days isolation or quarantine for asymptomatic people?
Yeah, this is really important, and what I would say is that guidance that we've put out is for the general public. I'm committed to wanting to keep schools open and to want to keep universities open. Many of these universities have kids living in multi-person rooms, so they're going to have to adapt our guidance for the safety of their congregate settings.
Right, but sticking in a room for 10 days, doesn't that sound extreme to you?
That is what our guidance was before. If a student were to go, and our updated guidance actually says you can leave isolation after 5 days if you can wear your mask all the time, including being able to eat meals alone so that you are not infecting others while you eat. That may need to be what's happening in these congregate settings.
Okay, so you would send that message to Georgetown, other universities, other companies that are at 10 days.
No, what I would say is if you're in a congregate setting, you have to adapt our guidance for that congregate setting. These guidances were meant for the general public.
Okay. We had a lot of viewers tweet in about your appearance this morning. Erica tweets, please ask Dr. Walensky, where are the treatments for COVID? Why are they not promoting them more? What is the...
What happened? Well, it just continued. She's terrible. I'm sure she's a nice person. She's a terrible communicator. She needs to be fired. Like Dr. Fauci, they need to find people who can answer questions. Now, if I were king of the forest, not queen, not duke, not earl, I would have every public health official, the top three, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, Surgeon General, every Saturday at 4 p.m., hold a press conference, invite 3 or 4 serious reporters and answer all the questions, and they would be there in the same room so they couldn't contradict each other, and then go away for a week. Because what they're doing is hopelessly confusing the United States. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. They are so bad at this. Early on, you could understand how people would give different messages and the science was moving very quickly. We don't have any coherence. This doesn't make any sense at all. And Americans are ignoring it. And CDC's credibility is shattered, as Chris Christie said on the show, for the rest of our lifetime. If they keep Dr. Walensky in there, it's going to be your lifetime, too, if you're 10. Meanwhile, Brett Baier also had on James Clyburn, the third-ranking Democrat on the Sunday show, Fox News Sunday, and asked him about his comparison of 9/11 to 1/6, cut number 16.
You said in a podcast, Congressman, this week that if you don't get voting rights done, it will be the beginning of the end of democracy. You also wrote in a column this week about the January 6th attack on the Capitol, comparing it to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, writing 80 years later, tyranny is threatening America again, this time from a domestic attack. Vice President Harris obviously had a similar construct with Pearl Harbor and 9/11. What do you say to families of World War II veterans who lost somebody at Pearl Harbor, or 9/11 families, victims' families, who agree that January 6th was a very bad day and a dark day in our history, but that comparison's not fair and seems to be being used to pitch voting rights legislation that was drawn up before January 6th?
I will remind them of the oath that all of us take when we take office, especially the President of the United States. That oath says, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, a recognition of the fact that there will be times in our development when we have to deal with the enemy from within. So I would ask those people who say that's an unfair comparison, why is it then that construct is sitting there in the oath that all of us take?
Yeah, that is the least persuasive answer I've ever heard anyone give on a Sunday show. I mean, it's just absurd. But great question, absurd answer. Here's another one. James Clyburn with Brett Baier, cut number 17.
What about, Congressman, the argument that the U.S. Constitution leaves election laws to the states? Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who's famously rebuffed President Trump's prodding for finding additional votes, pointed to Article 1, Section 4 in writing opposition to H.R. 1, and he wrote that federal legislators have no idea how elections are actually run, saying, quote, as a result, they choose policies that create chaos in elections administration that can overwhelm county election officials. In doing so, they create a vicious cycle where they set local election administrators up to fail, then demand federal intervention to address the problem they cause. Thoughts?
I would say to Mr. Raffensperger that I admire and respect him a whole lot, but he's off base here. I am a federal official, but I understand very well how elections are run. Most people who are now serving at the federal level have at one time served in some capacity at the state and local levels as well. So they, too, have an understanding. I would also refer him to Federalist Papers, I think it's 59, where Alexander Hamilton talked very cogently about this. And he says there that these federal elections cannot be left up to the states, should not be left up to the states. That's why states were not allowed to put the term limits on federal officials. So the elections are not solely conducted by the states. That's why the 1965
Can I stop for a moment? That
Voting
is
Rights Act
constitutionally incorrect. The reason the term limits failed is because it was an additional qualification added to the Constitution, which has an express set of qualifications. The case was completely different from this. There may be an argument that the Congress can overrule certain time, place, and manner restrictions on elections if they are specific to the state, but Congressman Clyburn did not answer that question either. It is such a relief to have a Sunday show, finally. And all of you should just go to your TiVo today and set Fox News Sunday and make it your regular Sunday viewing. It's now necessary viewing. Let's check the markets, brought to you by Birch Gold. On Friday, the market stabilized a bit on the Dow, down 4, the S&P down 19, the NASDAQ down 144. Overseas this morning, everything is red, but gold is back up to just under $1,800 an ounce. As the 10-year Treasury is at 1.77. We start the week sort of precariously balanced between the retreat of last week and the inflation-driven growth that is out there. Birch Gold will protect you if you want to put some of your savings, I believe 5 to 10% of your retirement into gold. And that means go to Birch Gold, or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. They will send you a free information kit on rolling over a portion of your IRA or 401k or SEP IRA into a gold, actual physical gold or silver IRA that they superintend in their own depository, and the IRS accepts that as legit, or just buying gold directly from Birch Gold. Again, hughgold.com, or text HUGH to 989898. Time for Relief Factor. Got my 7 miles in on Sunday. That's the longest I've done since destroying a toe. A little bit sore, but it's going away because my ReliefFactor.com. Then added 3 more on Sunday. Went to a place down in Orange County called the Beachcomber with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt. She's a Geico commercial. She walks over to groups of people and says, "Can I take a picture for you?" when they're trying to do a selfie with 8 people. But ReliefFactor.com got me going. Are you carrying curcumin, resveratrol, and omega? Down the hatch. And I love my Geico commercial fetching Mrs. Hewitt, but I love as well that we are able to walk together long distances or trundle, as I was doing on Sunday morning down at Huntington Beach. ReliefFactor.com makes that possible. As I get older, I make sure I take it every single day, so should you. Tens of thousands of you have already been persuaded. Please remember to take it this morning. Go to ReliefFactor.com. $19.95 get you started. ReliefFactor.com. Salena Zito is next. America the Inza Report. Stay tuned.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
If the election were held today, they'd be in deep, deep voodoo. But it's not going to be held today. It's going to be held in November. And the economy remains strong. There's inflation, obviously. But we're coming back. and this is America, and of course he'll take credit for it. It would have come back far better if he had lowered taxes and lowered regulation and not shut down the government, but it's going to come back. Indeed, it's coming back. Stock market all-time high. This is America. So the danger is that 11 months from now, given the media and given the fact that Americans pull for America, that his popularity will be better and better and better. That's the likelihood. And I'm not rooting for America to do badly just because I don't want Joe Biden and the Democrats to remain in power. All I'm saying is, being realistic, we have to assume that come November, the picture is going to look better for the Biden-Harris administration than it looks right now. And fight like hell, as he just now said, to advance our ideas of limited government, low taxes, a national security that is peace through strength and not strength through peace, and a government that gets out of our way. I think I might have told you I was watching a debate between the then chairwoman of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Reince Priebus. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz said, "We need a government that has my back." And I tweeted to Reince Priebus as he was speaking, and I said, your response should be, we want a government that gets off my back. And either he didn't get it or got it and didn't think it was clever, but the line was never used. But that's the difference. Democrats want a government that, quote, has my back. And we want a government that gets off our back.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on
Streaming on Salem Now.
¿Cuánto queda?
No queda nada. Que lo siento mucho.
And that's the only time you can come to Christ, when the Spirit of God calls you to the cross. Don't you hesitate.
Have you ever thought of going to seminary?
Madre, padre, ¿quién está listo para ser transformado por el poder de su palabra?
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. Michael Lane organized Woodstocks who are playing Woodstock bumps all week long. The help that I get from my friends on Monday morning includes Salena Zito with the Yinzer Report. She's the columnist for the DC Examiner, the Washington Examiner, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal. Good morning, Salena. Happy Monday to you.
Good morning, Sunshine. How are you?
I'm great as always. You've written a terrific column this weekend, the title of which in the DC Examiner is COVID-19 allowed too many people to pervert their power. And my favorite paragraph among many is, quote, "We've normalized all kinds of genuinely destructive actions in the name of stopping the spread, such as shutting down our schools on a dime, giving unchecked power to teachers' unions, firing people for not getting vaccinated. We've upended our children's mental health, expanded our opioid crisis, mandated things we have no business mandating, and cratered our economy. Many at the start lost parents and grandparents in nursing homes where they were alone and isolated with no one who loved them to hold their hand and take their last breath. Power is a wretched force when in the wrong hand." This may be your most popular column ever, Salena.
Oh, thank you so much. It's just, it's something that should be thought about on a daily basis. Power in the wrong hands or power in the right hands, but then used and abused, is a potent force. And we've seen how it has upended our society, our culture, our children, the way we think, the way we view each other. And I think what we see lately, and I think Omicron is sort of maybe the catalyst for this, is that we've said that this is it. We've had enough.
Yeah, well, I've seen incompetence melded with abuse of power. The incompetence comes from people like the Dr. Walensky with Brett Baer yesterday, unable to answer a straightforward question. I had dinner with a good friend last night who said, Omicron doesn't kill people, so I'm not going to get the booster. That's just a failure of communication, right? That's the CDC failing in its number one message to give a consistent, firm message that, yes, Omicron does kill people, not as many as Delta, but it's dangerous. And then the parents in Arlington County, Virginia that I know, who were told at 2:30 on Sunday, everything's good, we'll see you on Monday, and then told 3 hours later the schools are closed. That's one example out of thousands. These bureaucrats are out of their minds.
Yes, it's incompetence, and it's negligence. It's negligence of duty. I have been talking about the big problem with Biden, period, not just on how he has prosecuted the pandemic, is negligence. We've been negligent on facts. We've been negligent on on doing the right thing because people are afraid to lose their grip on power. So what do? They overreach, and we have had overreach all over, throughout all of the sort of cultural curators that have the largest influence in life, and that's government, and that's academia, and that's institutions, and we're seeing we've already seen a collapse in trust. I would say it's just completely caved in, and it's not ideological. It is going across the spectrum, and you see people now more and more that aren't just on the right who don't have a problem checking power, but independent thinkers and people on the left are also have gotten to this point.
Teachers' unions have lost parents for a generation. Now, I do believe Glenn Youngkin, I have a column coming out in the Post this week that will say, issue an emergency decree. There will be no more lockdowns. There is no such thing as remote learning. Remote learning is an oxymoron. We know that to be the fate. You will keep schools open or you will be fired. And if only 30% of your students show up, those 30% are going to get taught, and everybody stay home if you don't feel well. I mean, how much more difficult does it get than that, Salena?
It's really just common sense. I mean, it's just absolutely common sense. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember that, what people would be sick when we were in school and we were young, and half the class would be out, not there, but we still learned. Parents called in, you got the kids' schoolwork, and you did it.
And you had a substitute teacher or two show up, and sometimes you combine classes. I just believe that the blowback that the Democrats have built up for themselves in November, because they're not doing anything. And I also think God bless people who are trying hard, but if you're incompetent, you're incompetent. And Dr. Fauci and Dr. Walensky, they got to go. Do you agree or disagree?
I completely agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, are they the last to know? That was a horrific performance. Okay, I want to close with Brett Baer. Sunday shows have gotten the reputation, mostly deserved, of being Democratic extensions of the DNC. I think Brett Baer on Sunday, Fox News Sunday, replacing Chris Wall, he will dominate the ratings. Do you agree?
Absolutely. He is just crushing it. He's doing an incredible job.
Yeah, I think people should set their TiVos and inflate his ratings and drive that north to send a message that we're sick of the left-wing coverage of America by the Sunday shows. Salena Zito, always a pleasure. Everything Zito is found at salenazito.com. Coming back with hour number 2, America. Stay with me here on the Monday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
To Kamala Harris, it's right up there with 9/11. I remember what I was doing on the morning of September 11th. I was in the Empire State Building here in New York City being evacuated. I remember a lot of historic days. I remember where I was when Ronald Reagan was shot. I remember when the Challenger blew up. I don't remember really what I was doing last year. I'm working, I'm sure. We're never going to forget 2020, 2021, now 2022, and now more bad economic news in Biden's America.
Breaking now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
The U.S. added only 199,000 jobs in the month of December, falling well short of expectations as employers battle all the workplace disruptions going on with lockdowns, mandates, Omicron. There's a little bit of good news. The unemployment rate dropped from 4.2% to 3.9%, but economists had expected the economy to add 422,000 jobs in December. According to Dow Jones, the number, 199,000. Let's go, Brandon. 23 past the hour. Our number is 800-655-MIKE. 800-655-6453. And man, the scoundrels. Chuck Todd is one of the worst of the worst. I swear, you hear anybody say, oh yeah, Chuck Todd's a great guy and he's my buddy. You ought to run. You ought to be very wary of anybody who counts this guy, this hack, as an honorable journalist, because he's not. He's a hack.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
That's not why people are going on social media and being like, you must take the vax or we're going to kill you. David Frum's like, anyone who doesn't get the vax should be killed, basically.
Yes.
They should be triaged.
Quietly triaged. That was the worst part of it.
David Frum's a lot smarter than I am.
He's a warmonger.
For sure. But I'm just saying, as a person, David Frum has an IQ much higher than mine. I mean, I work with David Frum. David Frum is really smart. No joke. I mean, I'm not a fan, but he is really smart. So you have to ask yourself, why would David Frum be calling for, quote, quietly triaging American citizens to get the vaccine? Like, that doesn't even make sense. That's so dark. There's no justification for that. It's coming from a man who absolutely has the capacity to know better than that. He's not a Philistine at all. He's a cultured person. Why is he saying that? And below David Frum, who's at the very top of in my opinion, the IQ pyramid, I can't overstate, the guy's really smart, in my opinion. You go down like that, where you get to like the middle brow people and then the dumb people, and they're just like, let's just murder them. And you have to ask, like, why are people saying that? Are they getting something out of it? No, they're not getting anything out of it. Does society benefit? No. Does it make sense? No. So there's no actual motive for this. And I could name many other examples. Defund the police. How's that going to work, Dumbo?
Yes.
It's
or
only
gender
going to destroy.
Transition for 9-year-olds.
Thank you. Yes. So it's only going to destroy. And so if you see this force at work from which no one is benefiting, really, whose only purpose is destruction, maybe you're not looking at a human force. Maybe you're looking at something that's like can't be explained with reason or conventional motives of the kind I'm used to assessing in Washington. Oh, he's getting paid by the lobbyists. That's why he's doing that. That's not what's going on here. There's something much deeper going on here.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery.
He said, listen, I gotta give these niggas enough. Not too much, but enough that I'll have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
The race grievance industry would have you believe that blacks get up and think about nothing else except race.
If I tell you this is racist, yeah, I would get you emotional.
There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, 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 racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
You called your son, and you personally promised him you would be here.
Prayer is a powerful thing, Ethan. It really does work, if you believe.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. China has built the largest DNA database in the world, and it's only growing. This should concern all of us. That's because China could use this information in the future, perhaps, for example, to build bioweapons targeting specific ethnic groups. Given this background, common sense dictates that Americans shouldn't be storing their DNA or other personal information with Chinese-linked firms. Quite sensibly, after getting an FBI briefing about the firm's connections to China, the Los Angeles County Sheriff notified the county that his office wouldn't work with Fulgent. That's the genetics firm LA County hired for mandatory COVID testing and registration. Fulgent even admits in a public disclaimer it stores information outside the United States, where data privacy protections may not be as secure. I'll bet. What's alarming is how many others have chosen to work with Fulgent. The question is why.
Publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Now, be an interesting question is, does the living martyr have a happy nature? What's the vote here? So this is, all right, that's Sean's theory. That he does, but he doesn't portray it. I think there's truth to that. Right. Okay, fair enough. So, but that is the question for you, for your raising of your children. Is nature determinative, is one way of looking at it. But I want specifically to address you who is listening, or you who are listening. It's more precise grammar. I want to address you. If you don't have a happy nature, have you been able to have a happy life? Happy nature or unhappy nature does not mean unhappy life unless you let it. Let me just make this really, really clear. If nature were determinative, every book on happiness would be useless. Every happiness hour I do would be a waste of precious radio time. My whole conviction is unhappy nature need not be decisive.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and
Morning Glory, America. Bones Roar High, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live this morning. I'm on the West Coast. Hey, good Monday to you. Get going. It's Monday. That means Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News is with us. Sign up for your morning bit of news from Jake at punchbowlnews.com. Good morning. Good Monday to you, Jake.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great. It's Lipstick on a Pig week. You outline in Punchbowl News that Chuck Schumer ain't got the votes for Build Back Better. He ain't got the votes for voting legislation, and he ain't got the votes to break the filibuster, so he ain't got nothing. Fair summary?
Well, I think I think that's generally speaking, that's correct. I mean, unless there's some deal we don't foresee, but Joe Manchin has been absolutely clear. Well, two things are true, right? So the BBB is stalled for now. So I don't want to pronounce it completely dead quite yet, but it's stalled for now. Number two, Republicans aren't going to vote for the Democrats' voting overhaul bill. And Joe Manchin has said he's open to two different changes to the filibuster. He wants to keep the filibuster in place. He would be willing to two very minor changes on the filibuster. Now, could he vote for a carve-out for voting rights? I don't think so. But you can never say definitively that something will or won't happen. But my reporting at this point tells me that he will not do so.
I have listened to everything he has said, including especially the December 19th interview he did with Bret Baier. He will not change the rules of the Senate without Republicans joining in. That's what I've heard him say again and again and again. And if Republicans join in, he's open to these minor changes. So there's not going to be any, unless the Democrats win 52 Senate seats and then can lose Sinema and Manchin. And so I don't think that's going to happen. And there may be other Democrats who are relieved by that. Let me turn to Jim Jordan, Jake. You've covered this very well, and you alone among the reports that I've seen this morning got the constitutional aspect. Jim Jordan told the Rump Committee of the 1-6 Select Committee, pound sand. He did so under the speech and debate clause of the Constitution. They have the right to do whatever they want to do as legislators and not to answer for it. That's as old as Parliament. There are privileges that go with Parliament that came over to the United States when we framed up first the Articles and then the Constitution. So he told them to pound sand. They're not going to get Jordan. They might be able to get Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows has turned to a court and said, what can I give over and what can I, executive privilege that Trump has exercised. But I actually think Nancy Pelosi is left with ashes in her hands, too.
Well, you're right. The distinction he made is that he has the right as a legislator to be involved in any sort of legislative effort that he wants, even if it includes efforts to overturn an election for which there's no evidence of fraud. So, he's trying to make that case that he doesn't have to turn everything over. Now, the question is, Hugh, and I wonder what you think of this, if they then subpoena him and he ignores the subpoena, and could they hold him in contempt? Yes, they could. Could the Justice Department prosecute him? I have no idea. But the Democrats have a lot of decisions in the next couple of weeks on how to handle this. But he is saying that his communications with Meadows and with whoever else he was talking to that day, the president, are privileged because he was talking about a legislative issue. And I think that's going to be a tough pill for people to swallow if that is the case. I'm not a lawyer. You are. I think I don't know whether that is the case, but that's the point he's trying to make. So what happens if they subpoena him, Hugh? I don't know what the answer is.
He can ignore it. They can subpoena him, just like I can sue you tomorrow. I could sue Jake Sherman tomorrow for libel. It wouldn't mean anything. It would get thrown out of court, but I could sue you. You can sue anyone over anything at any time. Doesn't mean it has merit. They can subpoena him. It's a dead letter. The speech and debate clause is a massive protection around legislators. And while the House can make their own rules, and theoretically, Nancy Pelosi's Rump Committee, which is truly a distortion of how the House has worked for all these many decades and centuries, it could do whatever it wants. It can subpoena you, it can subpoena me, they can subpoena the world. It doesn't make it right or legal, more importantly, constitutional. So you've identified the issue. Jim Jordan is sharpening it, and Nancy Pelosi is left looking, I think, bewildered. Now, talk to me for a second about CDC, Jake. I just had Salena Zito on. I think CDC has collapsed. Its communications ability has collapsed. Dr. Walensky, Dr. Fauci, nice people. They just don't know how to communicate. And Sonia Sotomayor drove that home last week with what was maybe the most embarrassing moment in the modern Supreme Court oral argument history. Do you have any second places?
You know the court way better than I do, but I will say a lot of people have been, I'm talking not as a journalist, but as a citizen. I don't know what the CDC recommends on most issues, right? Because they've said, listen, don't test on day 5. You could go out of your house if you don't have any symptoms, but if you have a test, take it, and if you're positive, stay home. So those are necessarily in conflict with each other. So listen, as a human being, I do take pity in a sense, and I do sympathize with them because they are trying to communicate something they don't have a lot of answers to. So I think that's part of it, but I am really confused by the CDC. As an American, not as a journalist, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing if, God forbid, I understand this is less severe. I have 3 children. I don't want to get COVID. I don't care how mild it is. It would screw up my kid's life, and because they'd have to stay home from school and et cetera, et cetera. But, I don't know what I would have to do if I got COVID.
It's a mess. And yesterday with Bret Baier, she used the word congregate setting 4 times. You know, a lot of people out there saying, well, I'm a Presbyterian, I'm not a Congregationalist, so that doesn't apply to me. Honestly, congregate setting should DQ her from ever being on TV again. Because instead of saying crowded room, if you're in a crowded room.
Right.
It's sort of like this this academic speak, this Beltway speak, and they've just gotten lost. When, what I do with the show is you comment every Monday, usually at this segment, so that it's predictable, routine, and I ask simple questions. You have straightforward questions. If they would just get Fauci and Walensky every Saturday at 4 with 5 journalists, and that would be the message for the week. And the journalists would hammer it and get it, hammer it home, simple messages, repeated endlessly, sell things. That's Frank Luntz's rule. I don't know what's wrong with these people.
The funny thing is like, this is the old adage, right? Why use a $5 word when a $1 word would do, or whatever that is? I think people, I really do think, like, aside from politics, people are just looking for best practices. There are some people who don't care, and there are a lot of people, the majority of people, who are just looking for answers on what they should be doing every day in their everyday life, and they are in dire need of those answers. And I think people are confused, and I do think that they're trying to solve it. I mean, you see that Walensky's doing a little bit more media. She's going to talk. I think she gave a briefing on Friday, but I agree. I'm confused about a lot of it too.
You know, the movie Chariots of Fire has a great line in it when the sprinter comes to the coach, the professional coach, and says, "Sam, make me fast." And he replies, "You can't put in what God left out." You cannot put comm skills into Fauci and Walensky at this point. On Friday, I believe it's Friday, Governor-elect Youngkin becomes Governor Youngkin. I will be urging him in a Washington Post column to outlaw remote learning. There is no such thing. Have you been following what's going on in Arlington schools, how parents in Northern Virginia they're ready to revolt?
I've been following it all over, and I'm hoping my kids don't go back to remote school, because I agree, there is no such thing as remote school. I mean, look, you see Eric Adams in New York, a Democrat, who's saying our kids need to be in the classrooms and take ways to mitigate risk. And I mean, listen, the preponderance of evidence for kids is that it's a minimal risk, COVID. My kids are unvaccinated. They are required to wear masks in school. I don't have any problem with that. And we got a note last night from their teachers, from their schools, suggesting that they are going to be spending more time outside. The weather's going to be a little bit nicer in D.C. this week than last week when it snowed all week. I'm fine with all of those things. I will not be fine with remote school. I will be extraordinarily angry if my kids go back to remote school, which, by the way, during the first wave of COVID, my son was I think 2 or 3. He went to remote school. We pulled him out and started a pod with some friends because it was nonsense. So, I mean, I completely understand why people are furious with that.
Yeah, there is no such thing as remote learning. It is anti-learning. And I think Youngkin is going to lead. Doug Ducey's done a good job on this in Arizona, DeSantis in Florida. But Youngkin has the stage because he's the new governor. Last question. If you predict anything that's any bipartisan measure coming out of this Congress in the next 8 months?
Yeah, USICA, the bill to combat China. I think it's going to be a long slog, but I think it gets done at the end of the day. It's a top priority of Schumer's, but there's a long way to go.
I agree. Jake Sherman, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Jake Sherman. Go to punchbowlnews.com. Get your morning dose. It's completely free. And then come back. We've got lots more, including Governor DeSantis last night with Mark Levin on Fox News Channel. Don't go anywhere. I am here to bring you news without the spin and conclusions that are based in fact. Dr. Walensky, Dr. Fauci, they need to go. That's a conclusion based on the facts of their performance. They don't know how to do it. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Curious about what you're missing in the Hughiverse? The After Show? 21 years of Hugh Hewitt shows on demand? Go to www.hughiverse.com right now, where it's only 99 cents to join for the first month. www.hughiverse.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery.
He said, listen, I gotta give these niggas enough. Not too much, but enough that I have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
The race grievance industry would have you believe that blacks get up and think about nothing else except race.
If I tell you this is racist, yeah, I would get you emotional.
There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, 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 racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
You called your son, and you personally promised him you would be here.
Prayer is a powerful thing, Ethan. It really does work, if you believe.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. China has built the largest DNA database in the world, and it's only growing. This should concern all of us. That's because China could use this information in the future, perhaps, for example, to build bioweapons targeting specific ethnic groups. Given this background, common sense dictates that Americans shouldn't be storing their DNA or other personal information with Chinese-linked firms. Quite sensibly, after getting an FBI briefing about the firm's connections to China, the Los Angeles County Sheriff notified the county that his office wouldn't work with Fulgent. That's the genetics firm LA County hired for mandatory COVID testing and registration. Fulgent even admits in a public disclaimer it stores information outside the United States, where data privacy protections may not be as secure. I'll bet. What's alarming is how many others have chosen to work with Fulgent. The question is why.
Publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Now, be an interesting question is, does the living martyr have a happy nature? What's the vote here? So this is, all right, that's Sean's theory. That he does, but he doesn't portray it. I think there's truth to that. I think there's truth to that. Right, okay, fair enough. So, but that is the question for you, for your raising of your children. Is nature determinative, is one way of looking at it. But I want specifically to address you who is listening, or you who are listening, it's more precise grammar. I want to address you. If you don't have a happy nature, have you been able to have a happy life? Happy nature or unhappy nature does not mean unhappy life unless you let it. Let me just make this really, really clear. If nature were determinative, every book on happiness would be useless. Every happiness hour I do would be a waste of precious radio time. My whole conviction is unhappy nature need not be decisive.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Welcome back, America. Michael Lang, who organized the 1969 Woodstock Festival, dead at the age of 77. So we're playing Woodstock music this week. I'm so glad you are with us here. Hope you're watching on the Salem News Channel. That can be downloaded. You can watch it on Roku and many other devices. And, of course, on the app, the Salem News Channel app. We bring you the news. We make sure you hear the full content. We give you the context. We bring you the guests. This is your news channel, the Salem News Channel. Ron DeSantis with Mark Levin, the great one, last night. Cut number one.
Not a chance. And that's why they do it at 2 or 3 in the morning. And so we had a circumstance in Florida where they brought in a flight of people that had come illegally across the border. One of the guys they brought in to Northeast Florida ended up murdering somebody in the community. And so obviously he's not securing the border, which is a problem. But then to farm out people into communities all across the country is imposing huge costs on Florida and other states. And so what we've said is a number of things. One, we have sued Biden and we have a case in federal court. Two, I'm asking money for the legislature so that if we do get wind of these flights, and we haven't had flights in the last couple months since this has become a big issue, but we do anticipate they're going to try again. We have money that if they drop in Jacksonville, let's say, I'll pay for buses and we will send to Delaware or some of these other places. And then they'll know that Florida is not a good place to do it. We're also going to impose some restitution on the companies that are bringing them in with the federal government. These are contractors, bus companies, whatever. We're going to charge them per head a restitution, because when you bring somebody in, there's a whole host of costs that go along with that. Education, healthcare, social services, unfortunately, sometimes criminal justice. So we're going to be doing that and enacting that in the legislative session. We're also going to say to these companies, you can't do business with the state of Florida or any local community if you're facilitating, which is effectively a massive human smuggling operation. That's what Biden's doing. The people that are coming across, most of them are not Mexicans. They are from all over the world. The signal has gone out, just get to that southern border and you are home free to get into the United States. Don't apply normally, go through that way. And so that's what you're seeing. And we had people there last summer helping Texas, and we were happy to do that. But the problem that we ran into is, if you captured someone who was coming illegally only, didn't have drugs or anything else, you turn them over to the feds, then the feds would put them on a plane or put them on a bus and send them all across the country. So that was not helping the cause. And so now we're in a situation where we're really looking to keep Biden's policies out of Florida and impose some restitution on people who are helping to facilitate his policies.
That's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on with Life, Liberty, and Levin, the great one, Sunday night show on Fox News. You'll hear Mark Levin on many of these stations throughout the day. Mark also talked to him about the fact that Americans across the country are voting with their feet, leaving the ideal waste, as I call California, after the wasteland in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And they're moving to Utah, they're moving to Arizona, they're moving to Florida, they're moving to Texas, they're moving to Tennessee, they're moving to red states. Here's what the Governor DeSantis had to say about that. Cut number 2.
Net migration since COVID, for example, the influx is going to red states almost exclusively. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, you name it. The exodus is going from the deep blue states, California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and it's like clockwork. And you see that over and over again. And I always tell people, I love the people that we have in Florida. We have a lot of great opportunities. I'm not like begging for people to come into the state. We're doing well, but people vote with their feet. And I think people are more sensitive than ever to the type of government that they would live under and the type of policies that they would live under. Because I think COVID really crystallized that, because you find yourself in some parts of the country living under a governor who's just issuing these dictates, who's denying your freedom, denying your livelihood, job, education potentially. They realize, I think, how important it is to have a political culture and political leadership that respect and preserve freedom and their ability to live a good life.
Indeed, they do. That explains what people want: freedom. People are voting with their feet for freedom. Coming up after the break, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talks with John Roberts candidly about the threat to American athletes going anywhere near the genocide games that will begin next month in Beijing. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Good morning.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021.
Lives at risk. The nation's capital under siege. This wasn't a group of tourists. This was an armed insurrection. They weren't looking to uphold the will.
Quick question. If it's an armed insurrection, how come not one of the 700 people arrested have been charged with insurrection?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at Rumble.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized to go after perceived domestic enemies. And that's very scary.
Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power.
We are now all rooting for his success. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy.
We don't live in the United States of America as any of us would like to understand it.
We have a peaceful transition of power process. That's not what happened.
They interviewed General Flynn, and they did it in what was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
This is what third world security states do. They spy on their political opponents like this.
This is part of a concerted Russian influence operation.
Russian interference.
They colluded. They were in on it.
He would constantly say, I have seen evidence of collusion.
Until this is released, I can't comment. I can't go into the particulars.
Russians, I'm not going to be specific. But he knew he could just say it on TV and then hide behind, well, it's all classified, I can't get into it.
Well, it's classified. You can't see it.
Collusion. You just got to be willing to see it.
New York's Daily News ran this front page, Trump is Hitler.
How could 62 million Americans vote for Hitler? Are 62 million Americans Nazis?
We really almost thought it was a joke. Like, really, you're not going to accept that you lost this election?
Then they see the Russia collusion narrative sitting right there in front of them and say, why don't we just say that he cheated?
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence. It's given people who are bad faith actors a license to do whatever they want because they literally feel like they're fighting Russian spies and Nazis.
Russiagate has been the most egregious abuse of everything that was supposed to have been good about our government.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for is what they themselves were doing.
Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
That's the clip that Liz Cheney doesn't want you to hear. That's from President Trump's speech on January 6th, that the beat. Why don't you think they ever play that clip whenever? You won't hear that at all today. I guarantee you, all you're going to hear is Trump talking about, we got to fight for the country, we got to fight for what we believe in. You'll never hear this.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Why do you think they never put that in there in their coverage? Why do you suppose? You think they run out of time? You think it's a timing issue? It's just an editing concern? Yeah. He's coming. And guess what, Liz Cheney? Soon to be ex-Congresswoman Liz Cheney. There's not a damn thing you can do about it. You can try and you can stamp your feet and you can moan and bellyache and have Kamala Harris talk about, and we'll play a little bit of it for you. I mean, it's breaking news. It's the vice president and the president, because I want you to hear what these people are actually saying. We're praying that Joe Biden at least gets the decade right. We're hoping that he understands at least the decade. Not sure if it's high hopes that he'll get the year right, but maybe he'll at least get the decade right today.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Good morning, live, bringing you the news from the West Coast for a few weeks. I dodged the snow. I'm a snow dodger. I want to bring you Mike Pompeo, who was on with John Roberts Friday on Fox News talking about the danger to American athletes from venturing to the genocide games in Beijing. Cut number 4, please, from the former Secretary of State.
Two thoughts come to mind immediately. First, for the athletes. Look, this is the pinnacle of their career for many of them. They spend years getting ready for these Olympics. I have great respect for them, and I love the Olympics themselves. They're a great sporting event. They're great for the world. But those people in the Chinese Communist Party know those athletes are coming. They're going to monitor every single thing they say, every single thing they do. They will keep that in the hands, the clutches of the Chinese Communist Party forever. And if one of those athletes dares to say what you just said, John, what you just said on the air, talks about what's happening to the Uyghurs in Western China, talks about the massive human rights violations, talks about Taiwan or Tiananmen Square. If one of those athletes should so much as talk about that in a disparaging way, it may be that the Chinese Communist Party decides, well, we just want to talk to them and keep them here a little bit longer. So I would tell them all that they need to make sure they understand the risks that are associated with traveling to the Chinese Communist Party's homeland, its capital of Beijing. Second, from the globe's perspective, from the world's perspective, we now have the world's largest American companies, many of them American, who are going to foist Chinese propaganda on the world. And Xi Jinping's going to stand on that stage, John, and tell them how great it is. And he's not going to talk about any of the things you just talked about, the terrible things he's done to his own people and the terrible things he's done to people all across the world by foisting this virus on all of us.
One of the big sponsors of the Olympics is the Coca-Cola Company, and here's what they said in a statement a little earlier today, quote, "We believe the Olympic movement is a force for good, bringing people and countries together, and we're proud to use our name to raise its profile and support the world's most watched and revered international sporting event." Now, there's no question that the Olympics are a force for good, but they are also, like the 1936 games were in Berlin, a powerful force of propaganda for a repressive regime.
John, that's what I was speaking to earlier. There's no doubt the Olympics are a force for good. But the International Olympic Committee, who's now become so entwined with the Chinese Communist Party, chose to, under Chinese coercion, not move these games when they knew they shouldn't have held them there. This is not the place. There are so many great places you could host an Olympics, but not in this tyrannical regime that is designed to do so many bad things to so many people, and who doesn't care about life in the way that we do and doesn't respect rights. So when I hear Coca-Cola say that what they've done is they've told half of the story, I suspect they'll make an awful lot of money off of advertising from these games. But they should know that what they are promoting, what their presence is promoting, is they are permitting Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party to tell a story that is fundamentally different about what's really happening, not only inside of China, but Chinese efforts all across the world.
The last time the Olympic Committee boycotted an Olympics was 1980 in Moscow because of Russia's, or the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. Here's what Suzanne Lyons, who is the chairwoman of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, said in reflection on that. Quote, many, talking about the athletes, many never had the chance to compete at the Olympic Games again. To make matters worse, their sacrifice had arguably no diplomatic benefit. The Soviet Union stayed in Afghanistan for another decade. So she said the cost to the athletes is huge, and the diplomatic aspect of this doesn't do a whole lot. What do you say in response?
There's no doubt a boycott would cost these Olympic athletes a lot. If one of these athletes is detained inside of China, it'll cost that athlete and his family or her family an awful lot too, John. We should be mindful that there have been Americans detained. There have been Canadians that were detained for years during the Trump administration. This is not unheard of. The Canadian ambassador to the Chinese ambassador to Canada said, yeah, most people get to leave the country. This is not a place where we should have lots of Americans traveling under this kind of high risk system. I won't get into the geopolitics of what happened in 1980. That's an awful long time ago. But I can promise you this. Xi Jinping is very happy that he's hosting these games, and he's going to get 2 weeks uninterrupted to broadcast how great his Communist Party is.
Mike Pompeo is so on target. So on target. All right, let's go to Joe Biden. The president was in Colorado last week in Boulder. Cut number 3.
We're going to have windmills you're going to see that have 100-yard wingspans each propeller on that windmill, 100 yards long. So there's so much that is going to be able to be done. And when I visit the National Renewable Energy Lab, about 20 miles, I said, from here, it's also going to create significant number of jobs. The reason I'm telling you this is that's no solace that you lost your home now, but it's that we're going to be able to do a lot of renewable things that allow you to not only rebuild, but afford to rebuild and rebuild better, to build back better than it was before. And it includes billions of dollars for wildfire preparedness, resilience, and response to protect homes and public resources.
He's trying to sell the dead Build Back Better. He's doing so in a community devastated by fires and winds. And he's talking about windmills. It's almost unbelievable. There was no teleprompter. He's working from notes, and that's what we've got. Anthony Blinken, the incredibly shrinking Secretary of State, was on This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday. Cut number 4.
George, I don't know if the decision's been made, and it's clear that we've offered him 2 paths forward. One is through diplomacy and dialogue. The other is through deterrence and massive consequences for Russia if it renews its aggression against Ukraine. And we're about to test the proposition of which path President Putin wants to take this week. We have important conversations that are taking place between us directly at NATO, at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And the question really now is whether President Putin will take the path of diplomacy and dialogue or seeks confrontation.
What are those massive consequences if indeed Russia does invade?
We've been working in tremendous collaboration with European partners and allies and beyond to make it very clear that there will be massive consequences for Russia if it renews its aggression, by which I mean economic, financial, and other consequences, as well as NATO almost certainly having to reinforce its positions on its eastern flank near Russia, as well as continuing to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine. And this is not just me saying it, George. We've had the leading democratic economies in the world of the G7 make clear there would be massive consequences. The European Union and the NATO allies and partners as well. So we've been working very closely with them in recent weeks to get those agreed, decided, and in some detail.
This is a college professor attempting to be Kissinger. It doesn't work. All you have to say is there will be significant, severe consequences for Russia if it invades again. This will not be a replay of 2014. Blinken can't say that because he was part of the 2014 team that did nothing when Putin invaded Ukraine and stole Crimea and portions of eastern Ukraine. But that's what needs to be said. This will not be that. There will be deterrence. There will be and we should not be negotiating. I cannot believe we sent Wendy Sherman. We sent the Deputy Secretary of State. She is the weakest negotiator the United States has produced in the post-war era. Really, the worst. 1994 in Korea, the 2015 agreement with Iran. I think it was 2015. It might be 2016. Just terrible. Meanwhile, Kevin McCarthy appeared with Maria Bartiromo, talked about 1-6, cut number 5.
Well, the very sad part, the Democrats are in the majority. And when you think about this, coming up this month will be the one-year anniversary of one-party rule. And what do we have? We have COVID spiking, closed schools, and a crippled economy. And the Democrats' number one focus is still exactly where they've always been, H.R. 1, to change the election laws, to rig an election to give them an ability to win when they should not, to put a speech czar to tell us what to say, to use campaign finance to fund these elections, to weigh the Federal Election Committee to one-sided on the Democratic side. Now, we've been able to stop that. It's over in the Senate, but you watched what they did last week when we were out. Tried to politicize January 6th, and everybody believes what happened on January 6th was wrong beyond wrong. But as just you showed that clip, Speaker Pelosi and some are doing the research, using Hamilton, a fundraiser, they say, as that was used back in October 2020 for Act Blue. It really should be a different focus about securing our border, getting small business back to work, make it easier, not harder, to open a small business. Crime throughout this country. Let's make our streets, our neighborhoods, our schools safer again. And more importantly, what the Republicans have offered, a parent's Bill of Rights. Let's make sure our parents have a say in our kids' education.
Now, Kevin McCarthy doing a good job lining up the agenda for the fall. Now, Nancy Pelosi, by contrast, on with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation yesterday. Compare and contrast. Cut number 6.
Well, first, let's get the bill passed. I think that the order of things is very appropriate. There's nothing more important for us to do than protect our Constitution and our democracy. What the Republicans are doing across the country is really a legislative continuation of what they did on January 6th, which is to undermine our democracy, to undermine the integrity of our elections, to undermine the voting power, which is the essence of a democracy. So we have to do that bill. There is no more important bill that enables us to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
There are not the votes in the Senate for that at this point. So
well,
how
we just
will
have
you
to keep
handle?
working on that.
But have you
we just have to keep working.
Have you thought about that scenario? Because it is a potential scenario for these upcoming races where you have this dispute at the state level. How will you handle that?
Well, it isn't a question of how we will handle something a year from now. What is important right now is how we protect and defend the Constitution and the voting rights. What they are doing, and you pointed out very clearly, and I thank you for that.
I can't tell you
they are
more.
not only suppressing the
what
vote.
Margaret Brennan missed, what everybody except Bret Baier on Fox News Sunday would have missed, is when she said what Republicans did on January 6th. 725 people broke into the Capitol and staged a riot. Some of them had murder in their heart. It was a terrible thing. 725 people. She says Republicans did that. Okay, so she's a propagandist for the Democratic Party, and she's kind of old and not really there. I get that. Margaret Brennan let that go by. Republicans on January 6th did that. So a slander of every Republican sneaks by on a Sunday show on CBS. That is why Fox News Sunday with Bret Baier is going to crush them all. ReliefFactor.com crushes the minor aches and pains that come with exercise, aging. I got back to 7 miles. It's been 8 weeks since I broke my big toe. That's the longest I've gone. A little bit sore on Sunday, but I took my ReliefFactor.com. I took it this morning in the first hour. I take it every day. And I encourage you, join the tens of thousands of people like me who believe in natural anti-inflammatories, who don't want to take a leave every day, don't want to take an over-the-counter every day. They're bad for your upper GI. If you do it every day, you'll end up with upper GI bleeds. Been there and done that from long ago. Not the, whatever they call those things, NSAIDs, I can't take those. But ReliefFactor.com, I can and you should. ReliefFactor.com does work. So you got to exercise, you got to keep the aging away, you got to keep the blood pressure down, you got to keep the cholesterol in check, you got to keep the weight off. That's ReliefFactor.com, helping you do that every single day. Come right back, America. We got lots more ahead on this show, and we got next hour, Josh Kraushaar. 1-800-520-1234. 1-800-520-1234. When Nancy Pelosi says Republicans did that on January 6th, what do you think? Republicans did that and Margaret Brennan says nothing. I'll be right back.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
What change do the Democrats want post-January 6th? You have Pearl Harbor, World War II. You have 9/11. Just so you know, for all the children out there, you know there was a time where you didn't have to go through TSA to fly in an airplane? 9/11 gave us the TSA. 9/11 gave us the Department of Homeland Security. 9/11 gave us the NSA. 9/11 gave us a domestic spy agency. 9/11 gave unprecedented funding to the CIA and to the FBI, might I add. 9/11 gave all of these assets to people that, quite honestly, never earned them, but under the suffering of 3,000 Americans that were killed on 9/11, whatever you need, let's just get it done. 2008 financial crisis, passed Dodd-Frank, which only made the big banks stronger. 2008 financial crisis was a mandate for whatever reason. Let's reorganize the American healthcare system. We got Obamacare, hand out to big insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies and big hospital lobbies. Chinese coronavirus, hand out to Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, not to mention the tech companies. The tech companies were massive beneficiaries of the Chinese coronavirus. People staying at home, staying at their screens all day long. Stock prices of tech companies have never been higher. And so Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are saying this is comparable to January 6th is comparable to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. I want you to think about that because from their perspective, they're not wrong. In reality, they're wrong. But I'm going to tell you what they mean when they say that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Tesla was a genius. His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century, but in the wrong hands,
If you can stop an earthquake, doesn't that mean you could start one too?
that's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
There's an old brown battered notebook in my office at work. You have to find it, take it, and keep it hidden at all costs. The G20 leaders meeting downtown, they're in danger. In fact, the whole of downtown could be in danger.
If we are to build a superhuman, we must first eliminate those who are flawed.
People are created equally. All of downtown, the high-rises were built on rollers to withstand horizontal shakes. A vertical quake this size could collapse half of downtown.
We have
Welcome back. You got to admit, Woodstock was a great show. Michael Lang, who organized the 1969 epical rock and roll festival. He named a generation. He died yesterday. Not many people name a generation. That's pretty good. I don't know who came up with the me generation, but Michael Lang came up with Woodstock. Good morning. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Listen, I am live. I want you to hear again what Margaret Brennan and Speaker Pelosi had an exchange yesterday. And I'm going to stop this after the key phrase, cut number 6.
Well, first, let's get the bill passed. I think that the order of things is very appropriate. There's nothing more important for us to do than protect our Constitution and our democracy. What the Republicans are doing across the country is really a legislative continuation of what they did on January 6th, which is to undermine...
Stop, right there. Then, at that point, Margaret Brennan, if she were a real news anchor, would say, wait a minute, Speaker Pelosi, what do you mean what Republicans are doing across the country is a continuation of what they did on January 6th? What are you saying Republicans did on January 6th? 725 people invaded, that's how many have been charged, invaded the Capitol. 150 of them have been charged with serious crimes of violence. That's the Republicans? What Republicans are doing across the United States is correcting overreach and pandemic-driven innovations that unsettle them about the sanctity of the vote. We do not like mail-in balloting. We do not like ballot boxes all over the place. We do not like no voter ID. We do not like a lot of different things that became the rule and should not become the rule in elections going forward. There's a lot of election reform going on, and it's reform. Make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. The idea that the Speaker of the United States can casually slander 74 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump and every Republican, including those who did not, and go unchallenged on a major Sunday show tells you that that Sunday show is deaf. They live in the Democratic echo chamber, and they are deaf. Now, Bret Baier isn't. He's going to revive Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace took it down the same path of only hearing the Democratic talking points, only talking to Democrats, only repeating Democratic phraseology. And that's going to change. And so set your TiVo to whatever Fox News Sunday is in your neck of the woods. Put it on. But that is all you need to hear. They have completely undermined the ability of anyone. It's why their ratings have crashed. It's why cable news is in such terrible shape. Kamala Harris on PBS, which is, like all the networks, now an extension of the Democratic National Committee, cut number 9.
There has been great progress, no doubt. You know, COVID, for example, I mean, everybody is frustrated with that. And I understand, and I fully appreciate, there is a level of malaise. We're 2 years into this thing. You know, we want to get back to normal. We all do. But we have to then
Stop.
do the tough and hard work.
How bad of a politician is Kamala Harris? She used the M word. Play it again, please. Cut number 9.
There has been great progress, no doubt. You know, COVID, for example, I mean, everybody is frustrated with that. And I understand, and I fully appreciate, there is a level of malaise.
Stop! We need that on the permanent board. We need that up there with Kamala comparing January 6th to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. The vice president used the M word, malaise. Maybe she doesn't know. That's what is tattooed on every Jimmy Carter special forever. Mike in Ohio. Good morning, Mike. 1-800-520-1234. What say you?
Hey, Hugh Hewitt. Thanks for having me on the phone. I just wanted to say that Nancy Pelosi keeps calling America a democracy, and we're not. We're a republic. We have different rules of governing things, and she's trying to turn it into a leftist democracy. That's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Mike. A lot of people make this point. America is a republic in mediated representation. We do not do direct democracy, except some states do. California has a pretty wide open initiative process. So does Colorado. So do some of the other states. So those have direct democracy in part. So we are a mixed regime, but we are a republic, and we are a federal republic. And the idea that the federal government's going to take over elections is not constitutional. That interplay between the first clause of Article 1, Section 4 and the second clause has never been fully fleshed out. The Voting Rights Act is constitutional. It imposed a national set of standards on states after the era of segregation. That was completely constitutional, but it also ran out of its constitutional writ, which is why Section 5 was struck down after decades and decades, because first mover is the states. Second mover is the feds only upon a showing that is rational, and there is no such showing. I'm not really worried about this lunatic voting rights legislation they're pushing. Much of it would be struck down by the court. 1-800-520-1234. I want to talk to you about Omicron after the break. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show, straight ahead.
Curious about what you're missing in the universe? The After Show? 21 years of Hugh Hewitt shows on demand? Go to www.huniverse.com right now, where it's only 99 cents to join for the first month. www.huniverse.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Virtually every immigrant from any other culture wants to hear their music, wants to speak their language. It is completely normal and completely fine. It is a non-issue. I am with drivers from Pakistan who are listening to music from Pakistan. Is that wrong?
You probably enjoy it too.
Yes, actually, you're right. I happen to love. I'm weird in this way. I love world music. I love it from all over. But anyway, that's my. But it's not racist. It's a form of
intolerance.
Yes, that's intolerance, fear, overwrought nationalism. I think that nationalism can be good and can be bad. It depends how it's used.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Well, my colleague Jake Tapper, Mr. Biden, has gone and looked at the tape, and Donald Trump was specifically referring to people that feel that the Confederate monument ought to remain in public square. In fact, he specifically said, quote, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally, end of quote. Nobody says anything. But Donald Trump is pushing the big lie. And we talked about 2016. We talked about the fact that 2/3 of Democrats falsely believe that the Russians changed vote tallies when the 1,000-page Senate report, I didn't read all of it, I'm waiting for them to make it into a movie, but I read enough of it, reached two major conclusions. Let's do this again. Conclusion number one. Oh, they tried. They tried mightily, did the Russians, but they failed to change a single vote tally. YouGov poll respected 66% of Democrats believe the Russians changed vote tallies in 2016. And the Senate report could reach no conclusion one way or the other whether or not the Russian interference altered the outcome of the election. In fact, Jay Johnson, Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, said, I'd have to be a mind reader to know that. We don't know. 78% of Democrats, according to Gallup, respected poll, probably the most respected poll in the country, 78% of Democrats believe the Russian interference, quote, altered the outcome of the election, end of quote.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. Sometimes there are policies so destructive that at first you don't believe they're true. Joe Biden is currently defending one, his plan to award $450,000 to migrants separated from their families after entering the U.S. illegally. Children of deceased U.S. soldiers are separated from their parents permanently. They don't receive this kind of money. And migrants who enter the U.S. legally certainly don't get this kind of payout. The really big jackpot, it seems, is being reserved for the lawbreakers. There are some obvious truths here. First, behavior that's subsidized gets repeated. Joe Biden is effectively inviting many more illegal immigrants to breach America's open borders. Second, he's betting over time the payoffs will benefit his party in political terms. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Americans watch in shock and dismay as our president, the country's chief law enforcement officer, brazenly rewards lawbreaking, a clear violation of his oath to defend our nation's laws. It's a sorry sight indeed.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The public would be outraged if they knew the truth.
Why do you think our politicians are not on the sidewalk right now talking to you?
Don't have no respect.
The old wall randomly turns into a guardrail, followed by miles of open border.
Human trafficking.
That journey is extremely dangerous.
The 7-year-old girl died in the desert.
From the country of India.
A great pillar of the community was killed by a man who had been deported at least twice.
This little urn contains the ashes of my son. His dreams cut short forever.
We're so worried about other countries' problems, and we don't even focus on our own.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com. Streaming on Salem Now.
will see one young lady identify as transgender, and the next thing you know, 6 or 7 young ladies in that same school are now identifying as transgender.
Children taught at age 5 they can create their gender identity, and it's being celebrated.
Schools are lining up to push the transgender agenda on kids and cut parents out of the equation.
Every cell of their body that has a nucleus is male or female.
We've now seen parents losing custody of their children if they don't go along with this.
We've all been created XY or XX, so that means there's only 2 genders. And so really the battle is against the creator.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now all rooting for his success.
That's not what happened. It was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
I grew up poor, which is even worse than being poor. We would have sandwiches with no meat. My American dream entailed working hard and making $20,000 a year. But I surpassed that goal and became a corporate CEO.
We'll all be able to say, free at last, free at last.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery. There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, racist, racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com. Streaming on Salem Now.
This is a story of how 1 million children were placed with local foster families through an unlikely alliance between the Chinese government and a British footballer. Parents from all walks of life share their stories of overcoming the one-child policy by taking in orphans. With unprecedented access across the country, this is a unique insight into the lives of the 90s orphans now driving the 21st century's fastest growing economy.
This story needs to be told across the world. At a time where there's so much negativity and cynicism, here's proof that a single leap of faith can change the world.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
How 1 million children were placed with local foster families. Parents from all walks of life share their stories.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. You hear it live from the West Coast for a few weeks. I'm so glad I can take you to work this morning. Get up, get going. It's Monday. It's also the Omicron hour. I have to repair the damage done by Rochelle Walensky and many other people on TV this hour. If you saw Rochelle Walensky yesterday, Dr. Walensky leads the CDC, if we put quote marks around leads, was on with Bret Baier, who will rapidly make Fox News Sunday the go-to Sunday show. She said this, which is, I don't know why they are so adverse to admitting that there is natural immunity, but they are. Cut number 14.
Okay, back to the mandates for a second. People are losing their jobs. More than 220 Marines, sailors, airmen have been kicked out of the military for refusing to get vaccinated. Healthy service members, some of them have circulating antibodies in their blood from past infections, but they're not the antibodies the government recognizes. Is that fair?
I think the thing that's most disruptive to any business or industry is to have half their workforce out because they're sick with COVID. We have seen with the Omicron variant that prior protection protects you less well than it had with the current than it had with prior variants. So having previous infection seems to not protect you as well as against Omicron. Right now, I think the most important thing to do is to protect Americans. We do that by getting them vaccinated and getting them boosted.
Yeah, and I know that's the message, but the Omicron variant is infecting the vaccinated. And the vaccinated are transmitting the virus, correct?
That is true. It's infecting them at a lower rate. And importantly, those people who are vaccinated and infected with Omicron are not the ones who are ending up very sick in the hospital. Those are the people who are unvaccinated.
Right. But will the CDC take natural immunity seriously to study its effect on the big picture? For example, why not include recovery from infection as the equivalent of at least one shot the way other countries do?
We have taken this very seriously. Several months ago, we provided a scientific brief with dozens of studies, providing the updated science with this. Of course, that science is ever evolving, as has this variant, and so we need to update that science with regard to what we learn about Omicron, which so far has demonstrated that prior infection protects you less well.
I'm almost stunned at how bad she is at this. She is incapable of answering a question, listening to a question and answering a question. Listen to this cut number 13.
But the questioning in the Supreme Court also said that Omicron was as deadly as Delta. That is not true, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Omicron is not as deadly as Delta, at least by your data right now, right?
We are starting to see data from other countries that indicate on a person-by-person basis it may not be. However, given the volume of cases that we're seeing with Omicron, we very well may see death rates rise dramatically.
All right, she can't bring herself to say, you're right, Brett, it's not. And you know what that does? I'm about to do my messaging. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I had dinner with some old friends last night, 78 years old. And one of my closest friends says he's been vaccinated but not going to get the booster. And I kind of got mad at him. I said, people depend upon you. This is nuts. Go get the booster. He said, Omicron doesn't kill you. Now, that is wrong on so many levels. But I went back and started to look around last night. I stayed up a little bit too late as a result of this. Apparently, on the web, there are a lot of claims that Omicron has a 100% survival rate. That is not true. The survival rate for Omicron is higher than Delta and the original COVID, but is not 100%. Overall, the survival rate for all forms of Omicron is between 97 and 99.75%. However, Omicron can and will kill you, and boosters increase your level of protection against both variants and the original. Currently, Omicron is overtaking Delta in the United States, but it hasn't yet gotten rid of it. So what you understand, what I tried to explain, if you take two groups of 100 people, Group A is vaccinated and Group B is not vaccinated. All right, so Group A and Group B. In Group B, you will execute between 3 and 6 people. Now, you have a choice to join Group A or join Group B. Go join Group A. Get vaccinated in a booster. It's that simple. There is no reason to go join Group B with its 3 to 4 to 5% chance of execution, of deadly illness. Secondly, Omicron is not the last variant. We don't know what the last variant is going to be. The reason you get a boost, and we haven't gotten rid of Delta, the reason we get the booster shot is because the immunity that you receive from the vaccine and the second vaccine diminishes over time and it needs to be boosted. That's why you get the booster. And it doesn't matter that Omicron is less deadly. It still is somewhat deadly. Natural immunity does exist. It's helpful to have it. It's best to have both. It's like layers of armor. Do you want 1, 2, 3, 4, or none? The better armor, the best armor of all, is to have had COVID and survived. There's no denying that. The best armor of all, though, is 4 sets of armor. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go get Omicron because you will feel terrible. My son had a breakout case. My daughter had a breakout case. My other son had a breakout case. So I know that breakout cases are on a spectrum of feeling really lousy and on your back for 4 days to, I don't feel anything. Little itch in my throat. I know that. I know everything about it. I study this all day long. Rochelle Walensky is a menace to public health messaging. A menace. Pam in Delaware. Hello, Pam. 1-800-520-1234. Go get boosted. Get your vaccine. If you're not vaccinated, then get a booster. Hi, Pam.
Hi. 2 quick things. I just ask, what is Israel doing? Because I don't trust the CDC at all. And that's a change from the beginning of this where, being a practicing physician, all we did was look to the CDC to help guide us.
And you're a doctor, right, Pam?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I do. I read the Times of Israel every morning to see what they're doing in Israel. They're getting a 4th booster shot for everyone who's 60 and older.
Right. And the second thing, slightly unrelated, was a line from a song perfectly describes Nancy Pelosi. It's from a Broadway show called My Pal Joey, and it goes, I'm wild again, beguiled again, a whimpering, simpering child again, bewitched, bothered, and bewildered am I.
Well, if I had a producer, I would get that, but you're right. She does appear to me to have lost it.
Yeah, she's out there.
Yeah. Good morning. Good Sunday morning. That was the perfect Pelosi moment. Dr. Pam, when people think that Omicron has a 100% survival rate, have you run into that in your office? I mean, that is the worst bit of misinformation I've heard yet.
It's amazing how many ways people can misunderstand simple facts.
It is, but that's the CDC's fault.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, your message of it has to be simple and it has to be repetitive is the exact correct way to go.
Thank you, Doctor. Call anytime. Let's go to Michigan and talk to Bill. Hello, Michigan, Bill.
How are you? And I tell you right now, over the last 10 months, thank goodness for your show. Otherwise, I think I'd be having a heart attack every day.
Well, are you listening in Detroit? Are you in Detroit or are you over in Grand Rapids?
No, I'm in the Detroit suburbs.
Good to have you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I just want you to know, as you mentioned Brett there, and I enjoyed listening to Brett there. One of the shows I'd like to share with you, I think you already know this, obviously you do, is that Maria Bartiromo now has a show on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock here in Michigan. That's called Sunday Morning Futures, and it's unbelievable. I
played a segment from it today. Maria's show is very good, but it will never achieve Sunday news parity with the other ones because of carriage. So the only way to beat back the Democratic National Committee's arm that is the Sunday shows, and I've been on them all. I've been on with George, I've been on with Margaret, I've been on with Chuck, I've been on them all, is to stand up the best, which Fox News has now done. And Chris Walt's a nice guy. He's just like Margaret and Chuck and George. They're all nice people. They're all Democratic National Committee talking points people. And doesn't mean they're not smart, doesn't mean that they don't try their best, but they live in the bubble. Brett doesn't live in the bubble. He gets outside of the bubble, and as a result, his show is going to dominate. Maria's show is good. Fox News Sunday with Brett Baer is going to be better. Thank you, Bill. 1-800-520-1234, the Omicron Hour. Information, please. It does not have a 100% survival rate. Get your booster, America. I'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. China has built the largest DNA database in the world, and it's only growing. This should concern all of us. That's because China could use this information in the future, perhaps, for example, to build bioweapons targeting specific ethnic groups. Given this background, common sense dictates that Americans shouldn't be storing their DNA or other personal information with Chinese-linked firms. Quite sensibly, after getting an FBI briefing about the firm's connections to China, the Los Angeles County Sheriff notified the county that his office wouldn't work with Fulgent. That's the genetics firm LA County hired for mandatory COVID testing and registration. Fulgent even admits in a public disclaimer it stores information outside the United States, where data privacy protections may not be as secure. I'll bet. What's alarming is how many others have chosen to work with Fulgent. The question is why.
Publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Absurdity of yesterday, nothing does. If that's in poker, I think it's called the tell, right? That's the reveal. Yeah, this is sort of a joke. We're kind of playing a game here. We don't really mean it. We want to stop Trump from running again in 2024. We know the only person who was killed as a result of the actions of anybody on January 6th was Ashley Babbitt. And you know what? Let's have Broadway singers perform for us. I mean, you cannot write a Hollywood script that would be any more laughable than this.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Catalysts create change. When you have moments that all of a sudden you remember where you were, typically those moments mean something big is coming after that. So there's only a couple moments like that that define a generation. For my parents' generation, it's where were you when Kennedy was shot? My parents could tell you. 9/11, I remember exactly where I was. I was in second grade classroom at Quest Academy in Palatine, Illinois. I remember where I was when the 2008 financial crisis was unfolding. Gulf of Tonkin was an event, highly suspicious, I want to say, was an event that led to the official declaration of the United States getting involved in the Vietnam War. World War I, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, who was the presumptive heir to the throne of the Austrian-Hungary Empire. He died in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and everything else unfolded from there. One of the messiest catastrophic wars in human history. So you look through these dates, and then you see what comes next. When you have those moments, it creates a mandate for rulers to dramatically change things. And January 6th was no different. Now, I am by no means saying that what happened on January 6th is anywhere in the orbit of the catastrophe of World War I, World War II. However, that is what Kamala Harris and Biden are saying.
Keep up with what's trending.
Streaming on Salem Now.
You called your son, and you personally promised him you would be here.
Lucas, I don't know how to help you!
Your daddy loves you, you gotta know it, pal!
Prayer is a powerful thing, Ethan. It really does work, if you believe.
What reason does he have to care about some guy who's supposed to be his dad, but he's never around?
Welcome back, America. Using all my bumps today from the Woodstock soundtrack because Michael Lang, who organized the 1969 get-together, died yesterday. the age of 77. Takes a lot to name a generation. Mike in Glendora, 1-800-520-1234. The Omicron hour is upon us. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Hugh. I would like to find out from you, when Justice Sotomayor makes such egregious statements like the $100,000 and 100,000 people in bed for the kids, who corrects her, or is she going to make a judgment that's going to affect us all based on incorrect data? Is there somebody there to tell her that she's wrong?
After the arguments, they go back to a conference room, and the Chief Justice, beginning with the junior justice, who would be in this case Amy Coney Barrett, says, give us your preliminary vote. And there are two cases there. There's the Medicaid mandate and the OSHA mandate. And Justice Barrett will indicate, I think, that she's going to strike down the OSHA mandate and uphold the Medicaid mandate, which is what I would do. The Medicaid mandate seems to me to be consistent with the purpose of the delegated spending clause authority. But then they'll go around the table. And in the course of that go-around, the justices may or may not offer a point of view. Then they retreat to their chambers, and their clerks begin to circulate drafts of their opinions. And then the Chief Justice will assign a majority opinion, let's say 6 or 7 justices, they might get Breyer, to strike down the OSHA mandate. And the Chief will assign that opinion. Probably, I would guess, to Brett Kavanaugh, who is the major rule doctrine specialist on the court. That's a subset of constitutional law having to do with administrative law and the Chevron doctrine. So I'm guessing Kavanaugh will write the opinion striking down the mandate from OSHA. And
but who corrects her? But who corrects her?
That's what I'm coming to. In the course of that, they're very genteel. All right. If you've read First by Evan Thomas about Sandra Day O'Connor, you'll realize they're just 9 people, and they have to work together over 30 and 40 years. So they're very genteel. But one justice will say to another one over lunch or in the memos, or the clerks will talk to each other about egregious error. And some clerks, probably Justice Sotomayor's clerks, because that's their job, will go in and say, Justice, you made a horrible error. And you're going to have to correct that in your opinion. Or other clerks will tell those clerks she made a horrible error. If she does not, it will be a great disservice. But she will probably write something in her opinion acknowledging that she got it wrong, because it's so well known. But it will be done in a very genteel way. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Well, yeah, it does answer my question, but it still seems like it's not totally up for correction. I mean, somebody's got to correct her, and the same things would have to be dispersed amongst the other judges that might be making a similar thing, that she influenced the other judges into thinking something was really bad.
Well, everybody will know. The clerks all talk. I was not a Supreme Court clerk, but I've known many of them. They all talk on my circuit. On the D.C. circuit, when a case came in, the clerks involved in the case all talked to each other about the case. We had a very famous case which split 3 ways, Hanok Ella-Turen and Telleran. And it was Judge Bork, Judge Robb, and Judge Edwards. And so that involved 3 clerks, 3 judges, and we all talked. And so everyone will know that Justice Sotomayor swung and missed repeatedly. She was really badly prepped. And I have to wonder which clerk, one clerk gets each case to prep the justice. Some clerk really screwed up. Badly screwed up. And the other clerks are going to say to that clerk, you've embarrassed our justice. You gave her a talking point. The justices get they get too much work. They depend upon their clerk. And some clerk did Justice Sotomayor a dirty dog, because she just looked like a fool. And that is hard for a justice to deal with. And that's because some clerk briefed her, and that's on that clerk. I've never heard of a clerk getting fired, but this would be the occasion to fire a clerk. To give out information that will scare parents and misinform the public. I don't think she did it intentionally. She's not malign. She's wrong, but she's not rotten. That was a low moment in Supreme Court history. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. 1-800-520-1234, connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Streaming on Salem Now.
You called your son, and you personally promised him you would be here.
Lucas, I don't know how to help you!
Your daddy loves you, you gotta know it, pal.
Do you feel the love? Prayer is a powerful thing, Ethan. It really does work. If you believe.
What reason does he have to care about some guy who's supposed to be his dad, but he's never around? I can't do it again. I'm not ready for this, man.
I'm done with you.
We all deserve a second chance. Right, Ethan?
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. Sometimes there are policies so destructive that at first you don't believe they're true. Joe Biden is currently defending one, his plan to award $450,000 to migrants separated from their families after entering the U.S. illegally. Children of deceased U.S. soldiers are separated from their parents permanently. They don't receive this kind of money. And migrants who enter the U.S. legally certainly don't get this kind of payout. The really big jackpot, it seems, is being reserved for the lawbreakers. There are some obvious truths here. First, behavior that's subsidized gets repeated. Joe Biden is effectively inviting many more illegal immigrants to breach America's open borders. Second, he's betting over time the payoffs will benefit his party in political terms. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Americans watch in shock and dismay as our president, the country's chief law enforcement officer, brazenly rewards lawbreaking, a clear violation of his oath to defend our nation's laws. It's a sorry sight indeed.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Our despicable president, I've never used the term with regard to a president in my long career. Joe Biden's a despicable human being. And he's not only the worst president, he's the worst man to serve as president. He's a bad human being, in my opinion. And dagger at democracy, dagger at the throat of democracy. I wonder who wrote that for him. What left-wing hack. This is exactly what the left has always done, just as the fascists on the right have done, and the Nazis did. And that is, you accuse your enemies of what you're doing. It's a smokescreen. It's not projection. That it is as well, but it's not primarily projection. It's a smokescreen. I can ruin this country while charging my enemies with ruining the country. That is what you do. Who is suppressing free speech, the most important freedom of all? The left or the right, Joe Biden? Who has created a hatred of tens of millions of Americans like you have toward the unvaccinated? Is there a precedent for the way you have described vast numbers of Americans who in good conscience have not had have not been vaccinated? It's not even a vaccine, by the way. You know that the dictionaries have changed the definition. CDC changed it. I read it for you earlier this week. It is no longer, for all of vaccination history, it prevented you getting the illness. Now I think it's changed to protect.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
If the election were held today, they'd be in deep, deep voodoo. But it's not going to be held today. It's going to be held in November. And the economy remains strong. There's inflation, obviously. But we're coming back. And this is America. And, of course, he'll take credit for it. It would have come back far better if he had lowered taxes and lowered regulation and not shut down the government. But it's going to come back. Indeed, it's coming back. Stock market all-time high. This is America. So the danger is that 11 months from now, given the media and given the fact that Americans pull for America, that his popularity will be better and better and better. That's the likelihood. And I'm not rooting for America to do badly just because I don't want Joe Biden and the Democrats to remain in power. All I'm saying is, being realistic, we have to assume that come November, the picture is going to look better for the Biden-Harris administration than it looks right now.
With what's trending, subscribe on
Streaming on Salem Now.
I'm amazed that everyone didn't get electrocuted at Woodstock. Welcome back, America. Mike Lang died. We're playing the Woodstock soundtrack today because he did pass away yesterday, the man who put together Woodstock in 1968 and staged it in 1969. Michael Lang, dead at the age of 77. He named a generation. That's a big deal. Mike in Seattle, you're on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thank you. If the Republicans want their ship to sail, they better come up with something new, like Jimi Hendrix from Seattle, because they've always put Jimmy on last, like at Woodstock. Everybody was afraid to go before him because he was so innovative. He was writing letters to his family saying, I think I'm on to something, a kind of a mix between rock and jazz and blues. And one time this band, their amps went out, and he always carried amps in his trunk, and he said, well, I'll let you use my amps if you let me play.
Well, Jimi Hendrix was on the stage at Woodstock, very famously so. Again, I'm amazed in the rain that no one was electrocuted. Thank you, Mike. Stephen in Cherry Hill, 1-800-520-1234.
Hey, Hugh. Happy New Year. How are you?
Good. Great. Thank you.
So I kind of got the feeling that you were throwing the clerks under the bus. Are you saying that there's no chance that either A, Sotomayor actually believed it and wanted to hype it, or B, the clerks can't get paid off? Because I'm thinking the media is going to say, we're not going to let her seem stupid. Some Trump guy got a bribe into the clerk.
No, that's not. Look, clerks are human beings. Look, last night, one of my good friends, who's very smart and has an MDiv, told me that nobody dies from Omicron. He didn't need to get a booster. Those are two wrong propositions. They're factually wrong. So Sonia Mayor, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, may very well troll around the internet and come up with this nonsense that's out there that Omicron has a 100% recovery rate. That's not true. And so it might be stuck in her head. I am much more of the opinion that it is highly likely she got a bum clerk brief. And in my days as a DC Circuit clerk, I had to do a bench memo for every case for oral argument on the summarizing what the brief said, summarizing what the issues are, and putting in a factual overlay. And my guess is that the clerk of her four clerks that was assigned these two cases did some terrible research and gave her a bum bench memo, and she just read it. But that doesn't rule out the possibility that she's got a bad fact in her head, but they will correct that in the process of writing the decision. That will not show up in a decision.
Okay.
I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I'm just a realist about how this works. And if garbage in, garbage out. So if you get a garbage memo from a clerk, you're going to get a garbage set of questions from the justice. Thank you. I got to go back to Brett Baer, and I want to stress something. How important it is that everybody who listens to me and everybody else on the radio tune in on Sunday mornings to Fox News Sunday. You've got to put it on your recorders. We've got to drive the ratings of it up. Because in my lifetime, there has never been a fair Sunday show. There have been less bad Sunday shows. There have been less biased Sunday shows, but there's never been a fair one. There has never been anybody. Well, I guess Tony Snow had Fox News Sunday before Chris Wallace. Am I right about that, Dwayne? Before Tony did his... yeah, okay. So Tony Snow ran a fair game. But that was in the early days of Fox before they had the audience that they have now. Since Tony Snow gave up Fox News Sunday, there has not been an objective, fair, tough on Democrats, as tough as they are on Republican Sunday show. They all lean left, some of them wildly so, and on some days it's horrific. There isn't a fair panel, there isn't a fair weighting, there isn't a fair question set, nothing. Until yesterday or December when Brett took over for Chris, and I don't know that he's agreed to do it permanently. It's a big deal to do a 6-day-a-week commitment. I don't know that anyone wants, but I pray that he does. Listen to this yesterday when she won't even admit simple things. Rochelle Walensky is on with Brett. Cut 13.
But, you know, the questioning in the Supreme Court also said that Omicron was as deadly as Delta. That is not true, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Omicron is not as deadly as Delta, at least by your data right now, right?
We are starting to see data from other countries that indicate on a person-by-person basis it may not be. However, given the volume of cases that we're seeing with Omicron, we very well may see death rates rise.
Okay, honestly, I don't know how bad you can be on TV, but she set the bar pretty high. I don't know if anyone can be that bad. The answer is, you're correct, Brett. Omicron is not as deadly for an individual. You'd rather get Omicron than Delta. But Omicron spreads so much more rapidly, we're going to get multiple cases where Delta only had an X. We'll have 2X cases or 4X or 6X. And that's going to confuse the Steeler fans. They're going to say, who's X? I'm not X. I guess I'm safe. But by the way, Weekend at Ben's is coming up. They're going to have that movie in Kansas City on this coming weekend, the NFL playoffs. The point being, she can't answer a question again and again and again. Let me go and update the markets for you, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian. I was talking this weekend with some friends about the need, if they've done a reverse mortgage, and they did it 3 years ago, they should look into redoing that reverse mortgage because interest rates are lower. That hadn't occurred to many people. And Andrew Del Rey has been my friend for 20 years, Todd Avakian for 10. I know these guys. I know everyone who works with them. They were Sierra Pacific Mortgage. 888-888-1172, or go online to andrewandtodd.com. They've been sponsors of this show for as many years, and they do all this audience business. They've done my loans, they've done Dwayne's loans, they've done loans for my family, they've done loans for my friend, they've done loans for literally thousands of listeners, because my trust is your trust, and I rely on them, and they will get it done. Soup to nuts. They're a lender. The 10-year Treasury today is at 1.771. Now, the market's going to have another horrific day, it looks like. It's bad overseas. So I don't know what's going to happen in the course of the day. Don't know. It's not over till 4 p.m. Things could turn around. But the rotation probably is going to continue, and people don't know what to do because the Fed's going to raise rates, and we haven't got any earnings reports yet. We don't know how good December was. We don't know what the guidance is going to be. Inflation is going to infect guidance, et cetera. So a lot of stocks are getting hammered early in the year. Don't worry. Things will be fine. We're just going to have to cope with inflation because of Joe Biden. But that inflation is going to make it more expensive to have a loan. So you want to get your loan refinanced now, or if you're going to buy a second home or you're going to buy a retirement place, you're going to get an investment, do it now. Do it with andrewandtodd.com. More from Brett Baer yesterday, pushing Jim Clyburn. For the first time ever. I don't think Jim Clyburn's ever been pushed on anything on a Sunday show. Cut number 16 to the Democratic whip from Brett Baer yesterday.
You said in a podcast, Congressman, this week that if you don't get voting rights done, it will be the beginning of the end of democracy. You also wrote in a column this week about the January 6th attack on the Capitol, comparing it to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, writing 80 years later, tyranny is threatening America again, this time from a domestic attack. Vice President Harris obviously had a similar construct with Pearl Harbor and 9/11. What do you say to families of World War II veterans who lost somebody at Pearl Harbor, or 9/11 families, victims' families, who agree that January 6th was a very bad day and a dark day in our history, but that comparison's not fair and seems to be being used to pitch voting rights legislation that was drawn up before January 6th?
I would remind them of the oath that all of us take when we take office, especially the President of the United States. That oath says, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, a recognition of the fact that there will be times in our development when we have to deal with the enemy from within. So I would ask those
stop for a second. Go
who
back
say
and
that's
play
an unfair
Brett's question.
comparison.
Okay, start at the
Why
start.
is it then
Back
You
to
said in a
beginning of it.
podcast, Congressman, this week that if you don't get voting rights done, it will be the beginning of the end of democracy. You also wrote in a column this week about the January 6th attack on the Capitol, comparing it to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, writing 80 years later, tyranny is threatening America again, this time from a domestic attack. You know, Vice President Harris obviously had a similar construct with Pearl Harbor and 9/11. What do you say to families of World War II veterans who lost somebody at Pearl Harbor, or 9/11 families, victims' families, who agree that January 6th was a very bad day and a dark day in our history, but that comparison's not fair and seems to be being used to pitch voting rights legislation that was drawn up before January 6th?
I will remind them of the oath that all of us take when we take office, especially the President of the United States. That oath
All right,
says,
so in other words, he's got nothing to say. So he goes back to a stock answer. And people are left saying, my gosh, that's a great point that Brett made. And that was an inappropriate comparison by the vice president and Whip Clyburn. And he doesn't have an answer for it. And then cut 18. He's getting worked over by Brett. Cut 18.
U.S. technically, obviously, is a constitutional federal republic. Democrats, the last time they were in the minority, just the last time, used the filibuster 270 times. And one of them was to block the Justice Act, a police reform bill put forward by a black Republican senator, Tim Scott, from your state.
well, you know, you can call a Justice Act, you can call the act anything you want to call it. Now, I don't know exactly what was contained in that law, but, when you filibuster in order to get time so that people can bring people around to your point of view, that's one thing. But that is still a policy. That's not stopping anybody from voting. That's not a constitutional issue. I have said that the filibuster ought not be applied to constitutional issues like voting. Okay. We do not allow the filibuster to get in the way of the full faith and credit of the United States of America, because it would jeopardize the future of this country.
You could argue that police reform is search and seizure, and that's a constitutional issue.
It's so wonderful to have somebody actually speak for objectivity. He's not a conservative. Brett Barry is not a Republican. He's just objective. And this whole hypocrisy about the filibuster goes back, the whole justice argument, confirmation argument, goes back to Robert Bork. You've got to be educated. You've got to have a memory. You've got to be willing to use that memory, and you've got to be willing to hold both sides' feet to the fire, to do the Tim Russert treatment for everybody. And Tim Russert would do, he'd turn up the heat to burn for Republicans. He'd turn up the heat for simmer for Democrats. But the Sunday hosts don't even do simmer anymore. They don't even do simmer. They just don't. 1-800-520-1234. I want you to remember, ReliefFactor.com is a great sponsor of the show. Has been for years. I use it every day. Got my 7 miles in on Sunday. I think the break in my toe is healed. The toenail's still ugly. It still hurts a little bit. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt hit it yesterday for the 20th time. When you're used to, just hugging people and walking on people's toes, as married couples of a long period of time do, then you'll get a number of ouches and a number of... That's fine. Those go away. What's more important is I'm able to get out there and trundle again, and that's because of ReliefFactor.com. Relief Factor cannot heal broken bones. Relief Factor cannot do anything for serious disease or illness. It just helps with the inflammation in your body that follows exercise or aging. Don't use Aleve every day. Don't use Advil every day. Don't use an over-the-counter every day. Use ReliefFactor.com. $19.95 is a 3-week starter pack. Try it. You'll like it. Come right back. 1-800-520-1234. Josh Kraushaar is next. Hotline Josh on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
That's not why people are going on social media and being like, you must take the vax or we're going to kill you. David Frum's like, anyone who doesn't get the vax should be killed, basically.
Yes.
They should be triaged.
Quietly triaged. That was the worst part of it.
David Frum's a lot smarter than I am.
He's a warmonger.
For sure. But I'm just saying, as a person, David Frum has an IQ much higher than mine. I mean, I work with David Frum. David Frum is really smart. No joke. I mean, I'm not a fan, but he is really smart. So you have to ask yourself, why would David Frum be calling for, quote, quietly triaging American citizens to get the facts? Like, that doesn't even make sense. That's so dark. There's no justification for that. It's coming from a man who absolutely has the capacity to know better than that. He's not a Philistine at all. He's a cultured person. Why is he saying that? And below David Frum, who's at the very top of the, in my opinion, the IQ pyramid, I can't overstate, the guy's really smart, in my opinion. You go down like that, where you get to like the middlebrow people and then the dumb people, and they're just like, let's just murder them. And you have to ask, like, why are people saying that? Are they getting something out of it? No, they're not getting anything out of it. Does society benefit? No. Does it make sense? No. So there's no actual motive for this. And I could name many other examples. Defund the police. How's that going to work, Dumbo?
Yes.
It's
or
only
gender
going to destroy.
transition for 9-year-olds.
Thank you.
Yes.
So it's only going to destroy. And so if you see this force at work from which no one is benefiting, really, whose only purpose is destruction, maybe you're not looking at a human force. Maybe you're looking at something that's like can't be explained with reason or conventional motives of the kind I'm used to assessing in Washington. Oh, he's getting paid by the lobbyists. That's why he's doing that. That's not what's going on here. There's something much deeper going on here.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery.
He said, listen, I gotta give these niggas enough. Not too much, but enough that I'll have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
The race grievance industry would have you believe that blacks get up and think about nothing else except race.
If I tell you this is racist, yeah, I'm gonna get you emotional.
There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, 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 racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
You called your son, and you personally promised him you would be here.
Prayer is a powerful thing, Ethan. It really does work, if you believe.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store.
Welcome back, America. Playing Woodstock Bumps today in honor of Mike Lang, who died at the age of 77 yesterday, the impresario who got Woodstock going and named a generation. I'm joined now by Hotline Josh, who may yet name a generation. Good morning, Josh. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh.
I am been told by Kurt Schlichter, town hall columnist and occasional guest host for me, that in New Hampshire, Chuck Morse, who is the Senate president, is declared against Maggie Hassan. Kurt is relaying he's a pretty good candidate. I see that he's the Silver Hair Club, so he's got that going for him. What do you think about that?
Yeah, he is someone who's been, I didn't hear an announcement formally, but he's definitely looking at the Senate race and making moves towards that outcome. Yeah, I think there's going to be a primary in New Hampshire. I don't think anyone's going to clear the field. I've been a little surprised, to be honest, since after Governor Sununu decided he's not going to be running in that race, hasn't been more folks jumping into that field. But Kelly App, Senator, I thought she would have been a good number two, but she decided not to run. So there's not a huge bench, a lot of interesting names being talked about.
I had wondered, by the way, Josh, you have to move your phone somewhere where we can hear you breaking up. I thought John Sununu was going to run. Is that, Chris Sununu is the governor, he said no, but is John Sununu going to run?
No, I have not heard that, and maybe you have other sources that say otherwise. But it looks like there's going to be a crowded field of candidates. Morse is one of them, but I imagine other folks are going to be checking out that race as well.
Now, Rick Scott and the National Republican Senatorial Committee got good news over the weekend. Senator Scott wanted Ron Johnson to run in Wisconsin. He's going to, and Ron Johnson works hard. He's a very hard-working candidate. I've had my disagreements with him, but he is a retail politician extraordinaire. And then every Republican breathed a sigh of relief because they like John Thune. People just like John Thune. They wanted him to stay in the Senate and to succeed Mitch McConnell, I think. What'd you make of those two announcements?
Yeah, big sigh of relief that John Thune was running for re-election, because a lot of folks from that sort of traditionalist wing of the party, the governing wing of the Republican Party, have decided to retire. You know, Rob Portman, Pat Toomey. There are a lot of folks that are really close to Thune that decided to leave, and there was real worry talking to senators that he could have made that same decision. Now he's running for re-election. He's saying he's not worried about a primary from the Trump right. It's a good sign for the Republican caucus and for Leader McConnell. Johnson, I think, is also good news, just because Republicans didn't want to deal with a wide open primary at a time when they need to defend that seat. Johnson, I think has his issues. His favorability numbers are not that great in Wisconsin, but he has a Democratic field that's running far to the left, and I think Republicans are looking at that race much more optimistically because the Democratic field has moved to the extremes also in Wisconsin, and that's making and the environment as well being quite favorable to Republicans right now.
The other unremarked upon very big development yesterday, Mike Rounds, who is very esteemed in the United States Senate, Republican, came out and said, Joe Biden won. There's no doubt about it. There's not even one state in doubt. And despite conspiracy theorists, despite the former president's arguments, despite everything you hear, when Mike Rounds comes out and says the Republicans, he's signaling that Republicans everywhere should not run on election conspiracies. They'll get killed. Isn't that how you read that?
That's what every smart Republican I talk to has basically said, that the sweet spot is to support Trump's policies, but look to the future. Look at the issues facing the country right now. Any Republican that indulges or talks about election conspiracy theories of 2020 are really doing themselves political harm. And I'm not surprised Senator Rounds said that. He's been saying that for some time now. But there are a lot of these primaries in big Senate races where that's going to be a big test of which Republicans can stay pragmatic and can be sane and appeal to the broad center of American politics and win elections.
I think Rounds got sent out there by Mitch to demonstrate to Republicans they hurt the party. They hurt every Republican when they play in conspiracy theories.
Well, McConnell said that himself right before last year, right before the new year, where he said that he's looking at some of these Senate primaries and he remembers what happened in 2010, which was a huge Republican year, yet Republicans lost seats that were very winnable in three big states, three big races that looked like they were going to win. So that is the warning that McConnell has said pretty publicly, and but there's still challenges. There's still a lot of these primaries in states like Ohio, in states like Missouri, where you have some candidates that have been saying some pretty extreme things that are polling fairly well in these Republican fields.
I think the sweet spot is we are uneasy with the innovations that were adopted hastily in the panic surrounding the COVID arrival. And we want to legislate to avoid rapid change and innovation that is not checked by appropriate judicial review. And we're going to insist on voter ID. But we are not going to indulge the fantasy that even one of the four states President Trump has contested is close, because they're not.
No, and that's kind of Brian Kemp's position in Georgia, the governor of Georgia, who passed a slate of bills that actually respond. There were emergency measures that took place during the pandemic. He's rolling a lot back those emergency measures, but it's still drawing the wrath of President Trump. So that is the challenge that Republicans are facing across the country.
Josh Kraushaar, Hotline Josh for the National Journal, one of the most respected pundits in America. Follow him at Hotline Josh. Read what he writes from the National Journal and come back tomorrow. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Dwayne. Thanks to all of you and Adam. I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.